They sent her as a joke, a plus-size bakery worker in a room full of predators wearing diamonds. Her own cousin orchestrated the trap, an invitation to an elite Manhattan dinner designed to humiliate her in front of people who crushed reputations for sport. Vivian Hale walked in expecting cruelty. What she got was far more dangerous, the undivided attention of Roman Vescari, the most feared man in the room, who rose from his seat, crossed the floor, and claimed her as his own before the laughter could start. One night. One choice. Everything changed. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far Vivian's story reaches. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under Vivian Hale's apartment door like a secret someone wanted her to find. Heavy cream cardstock, edges embossed in gold, her name written in elegant script across the front. She picked it up with flowers still dusting her knuckles from the morning shift at Moretti's bakery, squinting at the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. You are cordially invited to an exclusive dinner gathering at the Azure Room, Manhattan. Saturday, 8 p.m. Black tie. No return address. No explanation. Just her name and a location she'd only ever seen in magazines, the kind of place where appetizers cost more than her weekly rent. Vivian stood in her narrow kitchen, the invitation trembling slightly in her hands, and felt the old familiar tightness in her chest, the one that whispered she didn't belong anywhere that required words like cordially and exclusive. She was 28 years old, 5'6", and wore a size 18 on good days when she wasn't bloated from standing on her feet for 12 hours. Her hair was brown and unremarkable, her skin pale from too many early mornings and not enough sunlight, and her hands were strong and scarred from years of kneading dough, wrestling with industrial mixers and pulling sheet pans from ovens that didn't care if you were paying attention. She should have thrown it away. Instead, she texted her cousin Melissa. "Did you send me an invitation to something called the Azure Room?" The reply came fast. Too fast. "OMG? Yes! I totally forgot to mention it. It's this amazing networking thing. Super casual. You'll love it. Wear something nice." Casual. Right. Because places with names like the Azure Room were definitely casual. But Melissa had always been good to her, or at least Vivian wanted to believe she had been. They'd grown up together, two girls in Queens with more dreams than opportunities, and while Melissa had clawed her way into marketing jobs and Manhattan social circles, Vivian had stayed steady, dependable. The one who showed up at family dinners with bread she'd baked herself, who remembered birthdays, who never made anyone feel small for staying small. So she ignored the instinct screaming at her to stay home. She ignored the way her stomach twisted when she thought about walking into a room full of strangers. She ignored every single warning sign because some pathetic part of her wanted to believe her cousin thought she belonged somewhere beautiful. Saturday came too fast. Vivian stood in front of her closet at 6:30, staring at the lineup of blacks and navies and one dark green dress she'd bought 2 years ago for a wedding she'd ultimately skipped. Nothing looked right. Everything felt like a costume she was trying on for a play she hadn't auditioned for. She settled on the green dress because at least it fit, pulling it over her hips and studying herself in the mirror with the critical eyes she'd developed over years of existing in a world that made sure plus-size women knew they were being graded. The dress was modest, cap sleeves, a neckline that showed nothing, a hem that fell just below her knees. It wasn't fashionable, it wasn't daring, it was safe, and safety was the only armor she knew how to wear. Her mother called while she was doing her makeup. "Where are you going all dressed up?" Angela Hale's voice crackled through the phone, sharp with the particular suspicion only mothers possess. "Just a dinner thing. Melissa invited me." Silence. The kind that spoke volumes. "Melissa," her mother repeated, flat. "It's fine, Ma. It's networking." Networking. Another flat repetition. Angela Hale had a way of turning words into indictments without raising her voice. "You don't need networking. You have a job. It's just dinner. Nothing with Melissa is just anything." Her mother sighed, the sound heavy with years of watching her daughter believe the best in people who rarely returned the favor. "You call me if you need me. I don't care what time." "I will." "I mean it, Vivian Marie." "I know, Ma." She hung up before her mother could list all the ways this was a bad idea, before that familiar voice of reason could convince her to change back into sweatpants and spend Saturday night where she belonged, on her couch, with a book, and the comfortable knowledge that she was invisible and therefore safe. The subway ride into Manhattan felt like traveling to another country. Vivian watched her reflection in the dark window as the train rattled through tunnels, her face ghostly and uncertain. Around her, the Saturday night crowd buzzed with energy. Couples dressed for dates, groups of friends heading to bars, everyone moving with the easy confidence of people who knew they had somewhere to be and someone who wanted them there. She got off at 59th Street and walked 6 blocks in shoes that pinched, following the GPS on her phone through streets that got progressively cleaner and quieter. The buildings here didn't just house people, they made statements. Doormen stood at attention. Private cars idled at curbs. Every window glowed with the kind of warm light that suggested comfort beyond anything Vivian had ever known. The Azure Room occupied the top floor of a building so aggressively elegant it made her mouth go dry. The entrance was marked only by a small brass plaque and a doorman who looked at her with the particular blankness of someone trained not to show surprise. "Good evening. Name?" "Vivian Hale." He checked his tablet, and something flickered across his face. Too quick for her to read, gone before she could question it. "8th floor. The elevator is straight ahead." The elevator was the kind with mirrors on every surface, reflecting her from angles she'd spent years trying to avoid. Vivian kept her eyes on the floor numbers as they climbed, focusing on her breathing, on the speech she'd prepared in her head about bakery operations and small business management, anything to justify her presence in a room that clearly catered to a different species of human. The doors opened directly into the Azure Room, and Vivian's first thought was that she'd made a terrible mistake. The space was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, tables set with white linens and crystal that caught the light like trapped stars, and people. So many people who all seemed to know exactly where they belonged and how to stand and what to do with their hands. The women wore dresses that probably cost more than Vivian's car, their hair and makeup done with professional precision. The men moved with the casual authority of people who'd never had to question whether they deserved to take up space. And every single one of them turned to look at her. The conversation didn't just pause. It died. Completely. Like someone had hit a mute button on the entire room. Vivian stood in the elevator doorway, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, and understood with absolute clarity that she'd been set up. This wasn't networking. This wasn't casual. This was a room full of sharks, and someone had just thrown her in wearing a sign that said chum. She saw Melissa then, standing near the bar in a dress that probably had a designer's name stitched into the lining. Their eyes met across the room, and Vivian waited for her cousin to wave her over, to smile, to offer some gesture of welcome that would explain why everyone was staring. Melissa smiled, but it was the wrong kind of smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes, the kind that said, "I knew this would happen, and I wanted to see it." Someone laughed. A woman near the windows, her hand covering her mouth like she was trying to contain something mean, struggling to get out. The sound broke whatever spell had frozen the room, and suddenly people were whispering, heads tilting together, eyes sliding over Vivian's body with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock at auction. She should have left. She should have turned around, gotten back in that elevator, and never looked back. But her feet wouldn't move. Some stubborn part of her, the part that had survived every cruel comment, every pitying look, every casual cruelty, refused to give them the satisfaction of watching her run. Then someone else moved. A man rose from the head table, a long setup near the windows where the lighting seemed specifically designed to make everyone look important. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like it had been built around his body rather than the other way around. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble if marble had the capacity to look annoyed, and he was walking straight toward her. The room went silent again, but this time the quality of the silence was different, charged, dangerous. He crossed the floor with the kind of measured pace that suggested he'd never hurried for anything in his life, and as he got closer, Vivian realized 2 things simultaneously. First, that he was even more striking up close, with dark eyes that seemed to see straight through whatever defensive walls she'd built. And second, that everyone in this room was afraid of him. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze, and said, "You're late." His voice was low, with an edge that suggested consequences for people who wasted his time. Vivian's brain stuttered, trying to process the words, trying to understand why he was speaking to her like they knew each other. I'm sorry. I didn't. It's fine. He cut her off, not unkindly, but with the absolute authority of someone who'd decided the conversation was over. Then he did something that made Vivian's entire reality tilt sideways. He offered her his arm. Come, you're sitting with me. She stared at his arm like it might be a trap. Like any second he'd laugh and pull it away, revealing the punchline she'd somehow missed. He didn't pull away. He just waited, his expression giving away nothing, while the entire room held its breath. Vivian's hand shook as she placed it in the crook of his elbow. His arm was solid beneath her palm, real and warm and impossible. He covered her hand with his own, a brief pressure that felt like reassurance or possibly a warning. And then he was walking, and she was walking with him, crossing that room under the weight of 40 pairs of eyes that couldn't believe what they were seeing. He led her to the head table and pulled out the chair directly to his right. Vivian sat because her legs had stopped taking instructions from her brain, and he took his own seat with the same casual power he seemed to apply to everything. Roman Vescari, he said, not quite looking at her as he adjusted his napkin. Since we're apparently skipping introductions. Vivian Hale! Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Vivian. He said her name like he was testing the weight of it. Then finally he turned to look at her fully, and something in his expression shifted. You have flour on your sleeve. She looked down and felt heat crawl up her neck, a small dusting of white near her elbow, probably from this morning when she'd been rushing to finish the croissants. She'd changed clothes twice and somehow missed it. I'm a baker, she said, because there was no point pretending to be anything else. I work at Moretti's in Queens. I must have missed it when I was cleaning up. She waited for him to look disappointed, to realize he'd made a mistake defending someone who showed up to elegant dinners with evidence of manual labor still clinging to her clothes. Instead, Roman Vescari smiled. It was small, barely there, but real. How long have you been baking? Since I was 13. My grandmother taught me. Is it what you wanted to do, or what you ended up doing? The question was unexpectedly sharp, cutting through the layers of politeness most people wrapped around conversations with strangers. Vivian found herself answering honestly, without quite meaning to. Both. I love it. The precision, the chemistry, the way you can take basic ingredients and make something that makes people happy. She paused, suddenly aware that she was talking too much, revealing too much to a man she'd met 2 minutes ago. Sorry, I get a little intense about bread. Don't apologize. He lifted his water glass, his eyes never leaving her face. Most people in this room couldn't tell you what they love if their lives depended on it. They know what they want, what they own, what they control. But love? He shook his head slightly. That requires actually caring about something beyond yourself. Vivian blinked, trying to reconcile this strange, blunt honesty with the elegant surroundings and the way everyone kept glancing at their table like they were waiting for something explosive to happen. Can I ask you something? She kept her voice low, meant only for him. You can ask. I'll decide if I want to answer. Why did you do that? Bring me to sit with you? Roman set down his glass and turned in his chair to face her properly. Up close, she could see the fine details that photographs probably missed, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened slightly before he spoke, like he was choosing his words with the care of someone who knew they carried weight. Because I've been coming to dinners like this for 15 years, and in all that time, I've never seen someone walk into a room the way you just did. What way? Like you were expecting a war but showed up anyway. The words hit her chest like a physical thing. Too accurate, too knowing. She looked away, trying to find something safe to focus on, and found Melissa instead. Her cousin was standing with a group near the bar, watching with an expression Vivian couldn't quite read. Fury? Disbelief? Something uglier? My cousin invited me, Vivian said quietly. Melissa. The woman in the red dress by the bar. Roman followed her gaze, his expression going carefully neutral. Melissa Chen. You know her? I know of her. She does PR for some of the families who attend these dinners. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its warmth. Did she tell you what kind of dinner this was? She said it was networking, casual. Roman's jaw tightened again, and this time Vivian saw the anger underneath, controlled, precise, but absolutely present. This is the quarterly dinner for the 5 Boroughs Development Council. Invitation only. Everyone here is either a major real estate developer, a construction magnate, or connected to one of the old families who run infrastructure in the city. The price for attendance is $50,000 per seat, and the guest list is vetted 6 weeks in advance. He shifted his attention back to her, and there was something almost apologetic in his eyes. There's no scenario where you received a legitimate invitation to this dinner, Vivian. Your cousin arranged for you to be humiliated. The words landed with the weight of truth she'd already known but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Vivian's hands curled into fists in her lap, her nails digging into her palms hard enough to leave marks. Why? The word came out broken. Why would she do that? Because people like your cousin build themselves up by tearing others down. Because she needed to feel powerful, and the easiest way to feel powerful is to orchestrate someone else's pain. Roman's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was explaining basic mathematics. She probably told her friends what she'd done. Made it into entertainment. Set a time for your arrival so everyone would be ready to watch. Vivian felt something crack inside her chest, some fundamental belief about the world and her place in it. She'd spent 28 years trying to be kind, trying to be good, trying to earn love through sheer force of niceness. And here was the truth. It didn't matter. Some people would always see her as a target. I should go. She started to stand, but Roman's hand closed gently around her wrist. Stay. Why? So they can keep staring, so they can watch me sit here knowing I don't belong? No. He released her wrist but held her gaze. Because leaving is what she wants. Because walking out of here would give everyone in this room exactly what they expected. But staying? His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Staying and having dinner like you have every right to be here? That would be far more interesting. I can't. You already did. You walked in, you crossed the room, you sat down. The hard part's over. A server appeared at Roman's elbow, setting down plates of something that looked more like art than food. Vivian stared at the arrangement. Some kind of fish with microgreens and a sauce drizzled in a pattern that probably had a name she'd never heard. I don't even know what this is, she admitted. Probably sea bass. The chef here has 3 Michelin stars and an ego to match. It'll taste like money and disappointment. Roman picked up his fork, cutting into his own portion with surgical precision. But the bread basket they bring out later is actually decent. Italian sourdough. Not as good as what you probably make, but respectable. Despite everything, the humiliation, the anger, the sick feeling in her stomach, Vivian almost laughed. You're trying to distract me with bread. Is it working? Little bit. They ate in silence for a moment, and slowly, gradually, the room's attention shifted elsewhere. Conversations restarted. People returned to their own dramas. Vivian felt the pressure ease slightly, though she remained hyper-aware of every glance, every whisper that might be about her. Can I ask you something now? Roman said. Fair's fair. What would you have done if I hadn't walked over, if you just stood there and everyone kept staring? Vivian considered the question seriously, trying to excavate the truth from beneath layers of fear and self-protection. Honestly, I probably would have stood there for another 30 seconds, memorizing exactly how it felt, and then left. And I would have replayed it in my head for months, picking apart every mistake I made, every reason they were right to look at me like I didn't belong. That's specific. It's what I always do, collect evidence against myself, build a case for why I deserve whatever bad thing just happened. She set down her fork, her appetite gone. I'm very good at it. Roman was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he spoke again, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. My father used to say that the world is divided into 2 kinds of people, those who apologize for taking up space and those who never apologize for anything. He wanted me to be the second kind. Never show weakness, never admit fault. Take everything you can and give nothing back. He paused, his jaw working slightly. It took me a long time to understand that he was wrong. That there's a third kind of person, The kind who knows they have every right to exist but chooses kindness anyway. Not because they're weak, but because they're strong enough to be soft. Vivian looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the expensive suit and the controlled power to something more complicated underneath. Someone who'd been taught hardness, but chose something different. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Someone scary." "I am scary." "I know. But you're also sitting here trying to make me feel better about being humiliated by my own family." The two aren't mutually exclusive. The servers cleared their plates and brought the next course, something involving mushrooms and what might have been truffle oil. Around them, the dinner continued its elaborate dance of power and influence. Vivian caught fragments of conversations about development deals and zoning changes and political connections, the casual corruption of people who'd never had to worry about consequences. A woman approached their table, tall and severe in black silk, her hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She placed one hand on the back of Roman's chair, leaning down to speak near his ear, but loud enough for Vivian to hear. "Roman, we need to discuss the Hudson project. Victor is prepared to move forward if we can guarantee the permits by July." "Not now, Caroline. It won't take long, 5 minutes." I said not now. There was steel in Roman's voice, the kind that made Caroline straighten, like she'd been slapped. "Of course. Later then." She started to turn away, then seemed to notice Vivian for the first time. Her eyes raked over her with the precision of someone cataloging flaws. "I don't believe we've met." "Vivian Hale," Vivian said, forcing herself to meet the woman's gaze. "How interesting." Caroline's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "And what is it you do, Vivian?" "I'm a baker." "How quaint." The word dripped with condescension. "I'm sure that's very fulfilling." "Caroline," Roman's voice could have cut glass. "You're dismissed." The woman's smile froze, her eyes flashing with something ugly before she managed to compose herself. "Of course. Enjoy your evening." She walked away, and Vivian exhaled slowly, feeling like she'd just survived some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. "That was Caroline Winters," Roman said. "She represents a consortium of developers who think proximity to power makes them powerful. She's wrong, but she's persistent." She looked at me like I was something she needed to scrape off her shoe. "She looks at everyone that way. It's her natural expression." "You didn't have to defend me." "I wasn't defending you. I was making a point." He turned to face her again, his expression serious. "Every person in this room understands exactly one language: power." Caroline walked over here thinking she could interrupt me, thinking that whatever business she wants to discuss is more important than this conversation. I needed to remind her that I decide what's important, not her. You just happen to be the vehicle for that lesson. "So I'm what, collateral damage in your power games?" "No, you're the person I'm having dinner with." That's more important than anything Caroline Winters has to say about zoning permits. Vivian studied him, trying to understand the logic of a world where dinner conversation trumped business deals worth millions. It didn't make sense by any metric she understood, but then again, nothing about this night made sense. The main course arrived, actual beef this time, cooked so perfectly it practically melted. Vivian ate mechanically, her mind elsewhere, replaying the moment she'd walked through the elevator doors, the laughter, the stares, Melissa's smile. "Why did you really bring me over here?" She asked the question quietly, not sure she wanted the answer. "And don't say it's because I looked brave. People don't do things like that for strangers." Roman set down his knife and fork, giving her his full attention. 3 years ago, my sister was engaged to a man from one of the old families. Good pedigree, right connections, everything our father wanted for her. 2 weeks before the wedding, she called it off. Said she couldn't marry someone who made her feel small every time she spoke. He paused, something painful flickering across his face. My father was furious, said she was throwing away an opportunity over nothing, that feelings didn't matter when building an empire. He spent 6 months trying to convince her she'd made a mistake. 6 months of telling her she wasn't strong enough to survive alone, that she needed protection she could only get through marriage. Roman's voice went flat. She believed him. She went back to her fiancé. 3 months later, she walked in front of a train. Vivian's breath caught. "I'm so sorry." "I watched it happen." watched her disappear piece by piece, watched her apologize for existing, watched her try to make herself smaller and smaller until there was nothing left. He looked directly at her, and his eyes were dark with something that might have been fury or might have been grief. When you walked through those doors and everyone stared, when I saw your cousin's face and understood what she'd done, all I could think was, not again, not if I can stop it. I'm not your sister. I know. But you're someone who deserves better than to be anyone's punchline, and I have enough power to make sure you're not. The weight of his words settled over them both, heavy with implications Vivian wasn't ready to examine. Around them, the dinner moved toward its conclusion. Coffee appeared, along with desserts that looked too precious to eat. Vivian barely tasted hers, too aware of Roman's presence beside her, too conscious of the way this night had veered so far off any script she could have imagined. Eventually, people began to leave. The room slowly emptied, power brokers air-kissing and promising to connect about various deals. Melissa made no move to approach their table. She left early, slipping out with her group of friends, not once looking back at her cousin. Roman stood when the crowd had thinned to just a handful of stragglers, and Vivian realized the evening was actually over, that she'd survived it, that tomorrow she'd wake up in her same apartment, work her same shift, and all of this would feel like something she'd dreamed. "Let me have my driver take you home," Roman said. "That's not necessary. I can take the subway." "I know you can. I'm asking anyway." Vivian wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the independence that was really just another form of pride, but her feet hurt, and she was exhausted down to her bones. "Okay, thank you." They rode the elevator down in silence, stepped out into the Manhattan night, where a sleek black car was already waiting. The driver opened the back door without a word, and Vivian slid inside, feeling the leather seats and climate control like a rebuke to every subway ride she'd ever taken. Roman didn't get in. He stood on the sidewalk, one hand on the doorframe, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Vivian Hale, who bakes bread and shows up to wars anyway," he said. "I'm going to remember you." "Why does that sound like a threat?" "Because you're smart." He closed the door before she could respond, stepping back as the car pulled smoothly into traffic. Vivian watched through the back window as he got smaller, a figure in an expensive suit standing alone on a Manhattan sidewalk, and wondered if she'd just met someone important or just survived someone dangerous. She wouldn't know until later that the answer was both. The driver didn't ask for her address. He already knew it, which should have been alarming, but somehow wasn't. Vivian was too tired to interrogate the logic of Roman Viscari knowing where she lived, too wrung out from the evening to do anything but sink into the leather seats and watch Manhattan slide past the tinted windows. They crossed back into Queens just after 11, the neighborhood shifting from pristine to practical, the buildings getting shorter and more honest about what they were. When the car pulled up in front of her apartment building, a 5-story walk-up with a bodega on the corner and a broken intercom that had been broken for 3 years, the driver got out and opened her door like she was someone who deserved that kind of treatment. "Thank you," she said, and he nodded once, professional and distant, before getting back behind the wheel. Vivian climbed the 4 flights to her apartment, kicked off the torture devices masquerading as shoes, and stood in her dark kitchen for a full 2 minutes before she could make her body move again. Then she called her mother. Angela Hale picked up on the first ring. "Tell me." So Vivian told her. All of it. The stairs, the setup, Melissa's face when Roman had walked her to his table, the way he'd sat there, defending her to women in designer dresses who thought kindness was a weakness. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was how Vivian knew it was bad. "That girl," Angela said when Vivian finally ran out of words. Her voice was quiet, which was somehow worse than if she'd been yelling. "That girl I fed at my table. That girl I drove to the airport when her own mother couldn't be bothered. She did this to you." "Ma, no. Don't you dare defend her. Don't you dare make excuses." There was a pause, the sound of her mother taking a breath that shook slightly. "You know what kills me? It's that you would never do this to someone. Not in a million years. You'd set yourself on fire before you'd humiliate someone for entertainment. And people like Melissa, they see that goodness in you, and they think it's permission to be cruel." Vivian closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the cool refrigerator door. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this." "You're supposed to be angry. You're supposed to be furious. You're supposed to stop making yourself small for people who wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire. Her mother's voice cracked slightly. Baby, when are you going to understand that you don't owe anyone niceness, especially not the people who treat you like garbage? I don't know how to be any other way. Then learn. Because this man, this Roman, whoever, he saw something in you worth protecting. Maybe it's time you saw it too. They talked for another 20 minutes, her mother cycling through rage and heartbreak and fierce protectiveness in equal measure. By the time Vivian hung up, it was past midnight, and she was so exhausted she could barely see straight. She fell asleep in the green dress, too tired even to wash her face, and dreamed of elevators that only went up in rooms full of people who couldn't look away. Sunday, she worked the early shift at Moretti's, 4 a.m. to noon, her hands moving through familiar routines while her brain tried to process what had happened. The bakery was her sanctuary, a small storefront operation that had been family-owned for 60 years, all industrial mixers and flour dust, and the yeasty smell of dough rising in metal bowls. Marco Moretti, 73 and built like a retired boxer, ran the place with his wife Rosa, and they treated Vivian less like an employee and more like the daughter they'd never had. You look like hell, Marco said when she walked in, not unkindly. Good morning to you, too. No, seriously. You sick? You need to go home? I'm fine. Just didn't sleep great. He studied her with the particular attention of someone who'd spent decades reading people, but he didn't push. Marco had survived in Queens by knowing when to ask questions and when to mind his business. He just nodded and went back to portioning dough for the ciabatta, leaving Vivian to lose herself in the meditative rhythm of bread making. She was elbow-deep in brioche dough when Rosa came back from the front counter, her face set in an expression Vivian had learned to recognize as trouble. There's someone here to see you. Vivian looked up, her hand still coated in butter and flour. Who? He says his name is Roman. Tall, expensive suit. Looks like he could buy this building with his pocket change. Rosa's eyebrows were somewhere near her hairline. You want to tell me why a man like that is asking for my baker? Vivian's heart did something complicated in her chest, a combination of panic and something she didn't want to name. I'll be right there. She washed her hands quickly, stripped off her flour-dusted apron, and walked to the front of the bakery with her pulse hammering in her ears. Through the display case, she could see him standing near the door, completely out of place in his tailored clothes among the Sunday morning customers buying their weekly bread. When he saw her, something shifted in his expression, relief, maybe, or satisfaction at being right about something. You found me, Vivian said, stepping around the counter. You're in the phone book. It wasn't difficult. The phone book, right. That thing that still exists, apparently. She crossed her arms, aware that she was covered in flour and probably had dough under her fingernails. What are you doing here? I wanted to see if you were all right. So you tracked me down at work? I thought about calling, but I didn't have your number, and showing up at your apartment seemed invasive. He looked around the bakery, taking in the old-school cash register and the chalkboard menu and the baskets of bread cooling on wire racks. This is where you work. This is where I work, she confirmed. It smells incredible. Thanks. That's mostly the sourdough. We do a batch every morning at 5. Vivian realized she was babbling, filling silence with information nobody asked for, and made herself stop. Look, I appreciate you checking on me, but I'm fine. Really. I survived. I'm working. Everything's normal. Is it? The question was too knowing, too direct. Vivian felt something defensive rise in her chest. What do you want me to say? That I spent all night replaying every horrible moment? That I keep seeing my cousin's face and feeling like an idiot for believing she actually cared about me? That I can't stop thinking about the way everyone stared at me like I was something they needed to study? She stopped, breathing hard, surprised by her own honesty. Roman didn't look away. He just stood there, absorbing her anger like he'd expected it, like he knew how to hold it without flinching. I want you to say whatever's true, even if it's ugly. Marco chose that moment to stick his head through the doorway, his eyes moving between them with unconcealed curiosity. Viv, you good? Yeah, Marco, I'm good. Because I can throw this guy out if you need me to. Roman's mouth twitched. I'd like to see you try. Is that a challenge? Because my knees are shot, but I can still... Marco, Vivian shot him a look. It's fine. Give me 5 minutes. The old man retreated, muttering in Italian about men in fancy suits and trouble that comes looking for nice girls. Vivian turned back to Roman, who was watching the interaction with something that might have been amusement. He's protective. Good. You should have people who are protective of you. I do. I have my family, my boss, my coworkers. I have people. She said it with more force than necessary, like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. I know you do. That's not why I'm here. Then why are you here? Roman was quiet for a moment, his jaw working slightly the way it had at dinner when he was choosing his words carefully. Because I spent all day yesterday thinking about what your cousin did to you, and I realized that letting it go, letting her get away with that kind of calculated cruelty, means she'll do it again, to you or to someone else, and I can't let that happen. Vivian felt something cold settle in her stomach. What are you planning to do? Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal. He paused. I'm going to make sure everyone who was in that room last night knows exactly what happened. That Melissa Chen orchestrated a public humiliation for entertainment. That she set you up knowing you'd be hurt, knowing people would laugh. I'm going to make sure that information reaches the right people. The ones who hire PR consultants, the ones who value reputation above everything else. You're going to ruin her career. I'm going to let the truth ruin her career. There's a difference. Vivian wanted to argue, wanted to say that revenge was beneath them, that taking the high road was the right choice. But standing there in her flower-covered clothes, still raw from Saturday night, she couldn't find the energy to be noble. Why? She asked instead. Why do you care what happens to me? Because someone should. Because you walked into that room expecting the worst and got it, and you still didn't give them the satisfaction of breaking. Because my sister didn't have anyone to stand up for her, and I won't make that mistake again. He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. And because you remind me that there are still people in the world who bake bread at 4 a.m. and believe the best in others even when they shouldn't. That sounds like a character flaw, not a virtue. Maybe it's both. They stood there in the small front room of Moretti's bakery, the Sunday morning light coming through the windows and making patterns on the old tile floor. Customers came and went around them, buying their bagels and their sandwich rolls, living their normal lives while Vivian's tilted further off its axis. If you do this, she said slowly, Melissa will know it was you. She'll come after you. Let her try. I'm serious. She has connections. She knows people. Vivian. He said her name like a statement, like a period at the end of a sentence. I appreciate your concern, but your cousin's connections are middle management at PR firms and junior associates at marketing agencies. My connections are the people who own those firms. There's no version of this where she has more power than I do. It should have sounded arrogant. It should have been off-putting, but Roman delivered the words with such flat certainty that they just sounded like facts. I need to get back to work, Vivian said, because she didn't know what else to say, because her brain was too full of conflicting feelings to process any of this properly. Of course. Roman reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. Heavy stock, expensive printing, just his name and a phone number. If you need anything, if Melissa contacts you, if anything changes, call me. Vivian took the card, her fingers brushing his briefly. You know this is crazy, right? You barely know me. I know enough. He left before she could argue, pushing through the door and disappearing into the Sunday morning foot traffic. Vivian stood there holding his card, staring at the simple black text, trying to understand how her life had become something that required calling men with unlisted numbers. Marco materialized at her elbow. Who was that? Someone I met at a dinner. That was not a dinner kind of guy. That was a, I own half the city and the other half pays me protection money kind of guy. He's not... Vivian stopped, because she actually didn't know what Roman was. Businessman, criminal, some complicated third thing that existed in the gray areas of New York power structures. He's just someone who helped me out. Uh-huh. Marco didn't sound convinced. You be careful, Viv. Guys like that, they don't do favors for free. They collect debts. It's not like that. You sure? She wasn't sure. She wasn't sure of anything anymore, but she pocketed the card and went back to her brioche, letting the familiar work quiet her racing thoughts. Monday came with all its usual mundanity. Vivian woke at 3:30, worked until noon, came home and collapsed on her couch with leftovers and a book she'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks. Her phone stayed silent. No messages from Melissa, no calls from Roman, no evidence that Saturday night had been anything other than a fever dream. Tuesday was the same. Wednesday brought rain and a burned batch of croissants that made Rosa threaten to retire. Thursday, her younger brother Jamie called to complain about his roommate situation, and Vivian spent an hour giving advice she knew he wouldn't take. Life continued being aggressively normal, and Vivian tried to convince herself that was fine, that she preferred boring, that excitement was overrated anyway. Friday afternoon, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Hello? Vivian Hale? A woman's voice, professional and crisp. Speaking. This is Diane Morrison from the New York Hospitality Review. I'm working on a piece about artisan bakeries in the outer boroughs, and your name came up as someone I should speak with. Would you be available for a brief interview? Vivian's first instinct was to say no, to explain that she was just a baker, nothing special, certainly not worth interviewing, but something in her, maybe the part that was still angry about Saturday night, maybe the part that was tired of being invisible, made her pause. What kind of interview? Just some questions about your work, your training, what makes Moretti special, maybe 30 minutes. We could meet at the bakery if that's easiest. When? Would Monday work? Say around 2? Monday was her day off, which meant she'd have to go in on her own time, which meant this actually mattered. Monday at 2. I'll meet you there. Wonderful. Thank you, Vivian. I'm looking forward to it. She hung up and immediately called the bakery. Rosa answered on the third ring, sounding harried. Moretti's. It's Viv. Did you guys reach out to some hospitality magazine about me? What? No. Why would we do that? Because I just got a call from a reporter wanting to interview me about artisan baking. There was a pause, and then Rosa's voice changed, taking on the particular tone of someone who's just figured something out. Did you recently meet a very rich, very powerful man who looks like he could have you disappeared? Rosa, because this sounds like the kind of thing a very rich, very powerful man does when he wants to make sure someone gets the recognition they deserve. Vivian closed her eyes. You think Roman set this up? I think Roman definitely set this up. And honestly, good for him. You're an incredible baker, Viv. You should have been interviewed by magazines years ago. That's not the point. Then what is the point? The point was that Vivian didn't know how to accept help that felt like it came with strings attached. The point was that she'd spent her whole life being self-sufficient because depending on other people meant giving them the power to hurt you. The point was that Roman Viscari was inserting himself into her life in ways that felt both protective and invasive, and she couldn't figure out where gratitude ended and obligation began. Never mind, she said. I'll do the interview. Tell Marco I'll be in Monday afternoon. You should call him, your rich, powerful friend. He's not my friend. Then what is he? Vivian didn't have an answer for that. She spent the weekend trying not to think about Roman Viscari and failing spectacularly. Every time she kneaded dough, she thought about his face when she told him about the flower on her sleeve. Every time she looked at her phone, she wondered if he was going to call. Every time she caught herself wondering, she got angry at herself for caring. Sunday night, her mother called. Your Aunt Rita just called me. Apparently, Melissa lost 2 major clients this week. Both of them called to say they were going in a different direction. Vivian's stomach dropped. Ma, don't you ma me. I know you didn't do this, which means someone else did. Someone with the kind of power that makes PR firms very nervous about who they associate with. It's not like that. Then what's it like? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like someone is making sure Melissa pays for what she did to you, and if that someone is the man who defended you at that dinner, then I want to send him a fruit basket. You don't even know him. I know he sees value in my daughter. That's enough for me. Her mother's voice softened. Baby, I'm not saying you should marry this man or trust him completely or let him run your life. I'm saying maybe it's okay to let someone look out for you for once. Maybe it's okay to not have to fight every battle alone. I like being alone. You like being safe. There's a difference. Angela sighed. Just think about it, okay? Think about what it means that someone with that kind of power chose to use it to protect you. After they hung up, Vivian sat on her couch and finally pulled out Roman's card. She stared at the number for a full 5 minutes before she made herself dial. He answered on the second ring. Vivian, you've been busy. I have. No apology in his voice, no pretense at innocence. Melissa lost clients. She did. And I got a call from a magazine wanting to interview me. You deserve recognition for your work. That's not the point, Roman. You don't get to just rearrange people's lives because you decided you know what's best. You're right. I don't. He paused. But I do get to use my influence to make sure cruel people face consequences. And I do get to make sure talented people get opportunities they should have had years ago. Those are different things. Are they? Yes. Because one is about punishment and one is about justice. Your cousin orchestrated your humiliation for entertainment. She deserved what happened to her. You bust your ass at 4 a.m. making bread that brings people joy. You deserve to be recognized for that. If you can't see the difference, then you've spent too long accepting scraps when you should have been demanding a seat at the table. Vivian felt something hot and sharp behind her eyes, dangerously close to tears. You don't know me well enough to make these kinds of decisions. Then let me know you better. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. What are you asking me? I'm asking if you'd have dinner with me. A real dinner, not a setup or a rescue mission. Just two people sharing a meal. Why? Because I want to. Because I've been thinking about you for a week, and I'd like to spend more time in your company. Because you're interesting and honest, and you make me want to be a better version of myself. His voice dropped slightly. And because I think you could use someone in your corner who isn't afraid to fight for you. I can fight for myself. I know you can, but you shouldn't have to do it alone. Vivian pressed her palm against her forehead, trying to organize her thoughts into something coherent. This is a terrible idea. Probably. You're essentially a stranger. I am. I don't even know what you do for a living. I acquire properties and businesses that are undervalued or underperforming and turn them into profitable ventures. I also sit on the boards of several development companies and occasionally mediate disputes between families who control significant infrastructure in the city. He paused. The legal version is real estate development and investment. The real version is more complicated. How complicated? Are you asking if I'm a criminal? Are you? By some definitions, everyone with power is a criminal. The difference is whether you're willing to admit it. Another pause. I've never hurt anyone who didn't hurt someone first. I've never taken from anyone who couldn't afford to lose it. And I sleep fine at night. If that's not good enough for you, I understand. Vivian thought about her cousin's face, about the people in that room who'd stared at her like she was entertainment, about the casual cruelty of people who'd never had to worry about consequences. She thought about Roman rising from his seat and walking toward her when everyone else was content to watch her drown. One dinner, she said. Somewhere normal? Nowhere that requires a $50,000 seat. Deal. When? Tuesday. I'm off at 6. I'll pick you up at 7. I can meet you. Vivian, let me pick you up. She was too tired to argue. Fine. 7. I'll see you then. He hung up before she could change her mind, which was probably smart because she was already second-guessing every word that had come out of her mouth. She had a date with Roman Vescari, who'd admitted he was probably a criminal but definitely the kind who only hurt people who deserved it, which made him either dangerous or principled or both, and Vivian couldn't decide which possibility terrified her more. Monday afternoon, she met Diane Morrison at Moretti's and spent an hour talking about sourdough starters and the chemistry of gluten development, and why she loved bread making, despite it meaning she'd never see a sunrise from the other side. Diane was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and efficient, and she asked the kind of questions that suggested she actually cared about the answers. How did you end up here? Diane asked, her recorder running on the counter between them. At Moretti's specifically? I was 19, broke, and looking for anything that would pay rent. Marco's last baker had just quit, and he was desperate enough to hire someone with no professional experience. He taught me everything I know. And 9 years later, you're still here. 9 years later, I'm still here, Vivian confirmed. Because this place feels like family. Because Marco and Rosa trust me. Because I get to make things that matter to people. Wedding cakes and birthday bread, and the rolls someone's grandmother used to make. It's not glamorous, but it's real. Diane smiled. That's exactly the kind of perspective I was hoping for. Too many articles about artisan food focus on trends and Instagram aesthetics. They forget that the best cooking comes from people who actually love what they do. They talked for another 20 minutes, and by the end, Vivian felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Pride. Not the desperate need for external validation she'd carried for years, but the quiet satisfaction of being seen for work that mattered. Tuesday came faster than she wanted it to. Vivian spent her shift at the bakery in a state of low-level anxiety, checking her phone every 15 minutes like Roman might cancel, like this whole thing might turn out to be a joke she hadn't gotten yet. At 5:30, she headed home and stood in front of her closet, having the same crisis she'd had the week before. Except this time, the stakes felt higher. This time, she was choosing to be seen. She settled on jeans and a soft blue sweater. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed she was trying too hard. Simple makeup, hair pulled back in a loose bun, the same everyday version of herself she presented to the world every morning at the bakery. If he wanted someone different, someone glamorous, he could look elsewhere. Roman arrived at exactly 7, knocking on her apartment door like a normal person instead of texting from the car like she'd expected. Vivian opened the door and found him standing there in dark jeans and a black Henley, casual enough that it had to be calculated, expensive enough that she could probably guess the price tag and then double it. "You look nice," he said. "You look like you're trying not to look like yourself." His mouth curved. "Is it working?" "Not even a little bit." They took his car, not the sleek black sedan from Saturday, but something smaller, a BMW that probably cost more than Vivian made in a year, but at least had the decency to look relatively normal. He drove them to a small Italian place in Park Slope, the kind of neighborhood restaurant with checkered tablecloths and wine bottles lining the walls, and absolutely no pretense at being anything other than what it was. The owner greeted Roman by name, which suggested this wasn't his first visit. They were seated at a corner table, and Vivian watched as Roman ordered in what sounded like fluent Italian, his whole demeanor relaxing in a way she hadn't seen before. "You come here a lot," she said when the owner disappeared. "My mother was Italian, first generation. She used to bring me to places like this when I was a kid before—" He stopped, something complicated crossing his face. "Before everything got complicated." "What happened?" "She died when I was 15. Car accident. After that, my father decided he needed to make men out of his sons, which mostly meant making sure we understood that weakness got you killed." Roman picked up the wine menu, studying it with more attention than it probably deserved. "I spent the next 15 years trying to prove he was right. Took me a long time to realize that the strongest thing I could do was admit he was wrong." Vivian reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. "I'm sorry about your mother." "Me too." He set down the menu, meeting her eyes. "She would have liked you. She always said the best people were the ones who worked with their hands and didn't apologize for it. Smart woman. The smartest." The food arrived in waves, antipasti and pasta and bread so good, Vivian had to stop herself from asking for the recipe. They ate and talked about nothing important and everything that mattered, families and disappointments and the small victories that made getting up at 3:30 a.m. feel worthwhile. Roman told her about his sister, about the girl she'd been before the world convinced her she needed to be smaller. Vivian told him about her father, who'd left when she was 12 and taught her that loving someone didn't mean they'd stay. "Is that why you don't trust easily?" Roman asked. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because I'm the same way." He poured more wine, his movements careful and precise. "My father taught me that trust was weakness. Your father taught you that trust gets you abandoned. We both learned the same lesson from different teachers." "So what are we doing here? Two people who don't trust sitting across from each other pretending this is normal?" "Maybe we're learning a new lesson. Maybe we're figuring out that trust isn't weakness or abandonment. Maybe it's just risk, and maybe some risks are worth taking." Vivian looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the expensive clothes and the controlled power to something more vulnerable underneath. Someone who'd been taught hardness, but was trying to choose softness. Someone who'd lost people and was still willing to connect. Someone who saw her and didn't look away. This terrifies me, she admitted. Good. It should. Anything worth having should scare you at least a little bit. They finished dinner and walked through Park Slope as the evening settled into night, the streets quiet and tree-lined and nothing like the Manhattan glamour of the Azure Room. Roman walked close enough that their arms brushed occasionally, and Vivian found herself leaning into the contact instead of pulling away. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they approached where he'd parked. "Always." "Why me? Really, you could have anyone. People who fit better in your world, who understand how things work, who wouldn't question every move you make." Roman stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Because those people bore me. Because I've spent 15 years surrounded by people who say what they think I want to hear. Because you walked into the worst situation possible and you didn't break, didn't hide, didn't apologize for existing. You just stood there and took it, and when I gave you an out, you took it with dignity." He reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "I don't want someone who fits my world, Vivian. I want someone who makes me question whether my world is worth fitting into." "That's a lot of pressure." "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just don't expect me to be perfect. I'm going to mess this up. I'm going to second-guess everything and probably push you away when I get scared and definitely make you regret choosing someone so complicated." "I'm counting on it." He smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it reached all the way to his eyes. "Perfect is boring. Perfect is for people who've never had to fight for anything. I want real. Even when it's messy. Especially when it's messy." He drove her home, and Vivian spent the whole ride trying to memorize the feeling of possibility. The sense that maybe she was allowed to want things that felt too big for her. When they pulled up in front of her building, Roman walked her to the door like they were in some kind of old movie, and Vivian found herself hoping he'd kiss her and terrified he would in equal measure. He didn't kiss her. He just squeezed her hand once, a pressure that felt like a promise, and said, "I'll call you tomorrow." "Okay." "And Vivian? Thank you for giving this a chance. For giving me a chance." She watched him drive away, standing on the sidewalk until his taillights disappeared, and then she climbed the 4 flights to her apartment with her heart doing strange acrobatics in her chest. Inside, she found 3 texts from her mother, 2 from Rosa, and 1 from her brother Jamie asking if she'd been abducted. She answered them all with the same message. "I'm fine. Better than fine. I'll call tomorrow." Because for the first time in longer than she could remember, Vivian Hale felt like maybe she was allowed to be more than fine. Maybe she was allowed to be happy. Maybe she was allowed to be loved by someone who saw all her rough edges and wanted her anyway. She fell asleep that night thinking about Roman's hands on the steering wheel, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious, the possibility that this terrifying thing might actually be the beginning of something real. Roman called the next day like he'd promised, and the day after that, and the day after that. They fell into a pattern that felt both natural and surreal. Phone calls during her afternoon breaks, texts that made her smile at 3:30 in the morning when most of the world was still asleep, stolen hours between his meetings and her shifts where they'd meet for coffee or walk through neighborhoods neither of them had explored before. 3 weeks in, Vivian's mother demanded to meet him. "Ma, it's too soon." "Too soon for what? For me to make sure this man isn't some kind of serial killer? For me to look him in the eye and see if he's good enough for my daughter?" Angela Hale's voice crackled through the phone with the particular intensity only mothers could summon. "You bring him to dinner Sunday, 6 o'clock. Tell him I'm making arroz con pollo, and if he's late, I'm feeding it to the neighbor's dog." "You don't have a neighbor with a dog." "Then I'll get one specifically for this purpose. Sunday, 6 o'clock. Don't make me call him myself." Vivian hung up and immediately texted Roman. "My mother wants to meet you. Sunday dinner. I tried to get out of it. I failed." His response came 30 seconds later. "What should I bring? Your patience. And maybe body armor. She's protective. Good. You should have people who are protective of you." Sunday arrived with the inevitability of a reckoning. Vivian spent the morning at the bakery helping Marco with the last-minute wedding cake order, her mind only half on the buttercream roses she was piping. The other half was catastrophizing all the ways dinner could go wrong. Her mother interrogating Roman like a hostile witness, her brother Jamie saying something inappropriate, Roman realizing that her family was loud and chaotic and nothing like the controlled environments he probably preferred. She met Roman at 5:30 outside her mother's building in Astoria, a 3-story walk-up that had housed 3 generations of Hales and showed every year of its age. He pulled up in the BMW, got out, and handed her a bottle of wine that probably cost more than her monthly grocery bill. "You didn't have to bring wine. Your mother is cooking for me. It's the least I can do." He studied her face, his expression softening. "You're nervous." "Terrified. Of your own family?" "Of you meeting my family. There's a difference." Vivian twisted her hands together, trying to articulate the anxiety sitting heavy in her chest. "You come from this world of expensive dinners and powerful people and everything controlled and perfect. My family is... we're loud. We argue about everything. My brother is 24 and still figuring out what he wants to be when he grows up. My mom will probably ask you invasive questions about your intentions. It's a lot." Roman caught her hands, stilling their nervous movement. "Vivian, I grew up in a house where dinner meant my father listing everything my brother and I did wrong that day while my mother tried to keep the peace. Where showing emotion meant you were weak and asking for help meant you deserved whatever happened to you. Your family is loud? Good. That means they're alive. They argue? That means they care enough to fight. Your brother is still figuring things out? That means he has people who support him while he does." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not going to judge your family. I'm going to be grateful you're letting me meet them." Vivian felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of anxiety unwinding slightly. "Okay, but don't say I didn't warn you." They climbed the 2 flights to her mother's apartment, and Vivian used her key because Angela Hale believed locked doors were for people who didn't have family. The smell hit them immediately: garlic and saffron and chicken, the scent of Sunday dinner that had permeated Vivian's entire childhood. "Ma, we're here!" "About time." Her mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and stopped dead when she saw Roman. Angela Hale was 56, 5'2", and had the kind of presence that made people 2 feet taller take a step back. She looked Roman up and down with the assessing eye of someone who'd spent decades reading people, and Vivian held her breath. "Mrs. Hale." Roman extended his hand. "Thank you for having me in your home." Angela took his hand but didn't shake it immediately. She just held it, her eyes locked on his face, and Vivian knew her mother was doing that thing she did, reading beneath surfaces, looking for lies, searching for any sign that this man would hurt her daughter. "You're taller than I expected," Angela said finally. "Is that good or bad?" "Haven't decided yet." She released his hand and took the wine bottle, examining the label with raised eyebrows. "This is expensive." "It's a thank you for raising a daughter who sees the best in people even when she probably shouldn't." Angela's expression shifted, something softening around her eyes. "You're either very smart or very good at saying what people want to hear." "Both, probably, but in this case, I'm being honest." "We'll see." She pointed toward the living room. "Go sit. Jamie's in there pretending he's not trying to hear every word we're saying. Dinner's in 20 minutes. Roman shot Vivian a look that might have been amusement or might have been panic. She couldn't quite tell. And they moved into the small living room where her brother was sprawled on the couch, doing exactly what their mother had said, pretending not to be listening while clearly hanging on every word. Jamie Hale was 24, tall and skinny, in the way of people whose metabolism hadn't caught up with their appetite, with the same brown hair and pale skin as his sister. He looked up when they entered, his eyes going wide for a second before he managed to compose himself. "So you're the guy." "Jamie," Vivian's voice carried a warning. "What? I'm just saying, you're the guy everyone's been talking about." Roman settled into the armchair across from the couch, completely at ease despite being in a stranger's home with said stranger's protective family surrounding him. "I'm Roman, and you must be Jamie." "The brother, yeah. The one who's supposed to threaten you if you hurt my sister." "Jamie, I swear to..." "It's fine." Roman leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees. "If I were you, I'd be skeptical too. Some guy shows up out of nowhere, starts dating your sister, probably has more money than sense. I'd want to make sure his intentions were good." "Are they? Good intentions?" "The best I'm capable of, which might not be perfect, but it's honest." Jamie studied him for a long moment, and Vivian could see her brother doing the same calculation their mother had done, trying to figure out if Roman was real or performing, if he could be trusted, or if he was just another person who'd hurt someone Jamie loved. "You make her happy," Jamie said finally. "She smiles at her phone now. She used to never do that." "Good. She should smile more. She has a great smile." "Okay, enough." Vivian's face was hot. "Can we talk about literally anything else? Jamie, how's the job search going?" Her brother groaned, throwing his head back dramatically. "It's going. I had an interview at this marketing firm last week. They said they'd call. They haven't called." "Did you follow up?" "I sent a thank you email." "And?" "And I'm waiting. What else am I supposed to do? Show up at their office and demand a job?" Roman cleared his throat. "Actually, that's not a terrible idea. Modified slightly. If you're serious about wanting the position, show up with a portfolio of ideas specific to their company. Demonstrate value instead of just asking for an opportunity. Most people won't do it because it takes effort. That's exactly why it works." Jamie sat up straighter. "You think that would actually work?" "I think confidence and preparation get you further than waiting for permission." Roman shrugged. "But I also run a business where aggressive strategy is rewarded. Your mileage may vary." "Well, what kind of business?" "Real estate development. Property acquisition. I buy things that aren't working and figure out how to make them work." "That's vague." "It's intentionally vague. The details are boring. Or illegal." "Jamie!" Vivian wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. But Roman just laughed. A real laugh, not the polite sound he probably used in business meetings. "Your sister asked me the same thing. I told her the truth. By some definitions, everyone with power does illegal things. The difference is whether you're willing to admit it and whether you hurt people who don't deserve it." He looked at Jamie directly. "I've never hurt anyone who didn't hurt someone first, and I sleep fine at night. If that's not good enough for your family, I understand." Jamie looked at Vivian, then back at Roman. "My sister trusts you. That's enough for me. But if you screw her over, I know people who know people." "No, you don't," Vivian said. "I could know people. I could develop connections specifically for revenge purposes. You work at a coffee shop where many people come. People with skills, people who might owe me favors." Angela called them to dinner before Jamie could elaborate on his imaginary criminal network. The table was set with mismatched plates and the good silverware that only came out for special occasions, and there was enough food to feed twice their number because Angela Hale believed in abundance the way some people believed in religion. They sat, Vivian between Roman and her mother, Jamie across the table looking like he was watching his favorite show, and for a moment there was just the sound of serving spoons against dishes and glasses being filled and the comfortable chaos of family dinner. "So, Roman," Angela passed him the rice. "Tell me about your family." Vivian tensed, knowing this was dangerous territory, but Roman handled it with the same straightforward honesty he'd shown all evening. "My mother died when I was 15. Car accident. My father raised me and my younger brother with very specific ideas about what it meant to be strong, most of which involved not showing emotion or weakness. My brother followed those rules. I tried to and eventually realized I didn't want to become the kind of man my father was." He took a bite of chicken, his expression carefully neutral. "My sister, my younger sister, she struggled with those expectations. She tried to be what everyone wanted and it broke her. She died 3 years ago." The table went quiet. Even Jamie, who'd been reaching for more plantains, froze. "I'm so sorry," Angela said, and her voice carried the weight of someone who understood loss. "That's not something a parent should survive." "No, it's not." Roman set down his fork. "But it taught me that protecting the people you care about means actually seeing them, not just trying to control them. It taught me that love isn't about making someone smaller so they fit your expectations. And it taught me that I'd rather be alone than watch someone I care about disappear because they think they have to be perfect to deserve love." He looked at Vivian then, and there was something raw in his expression, something that made her throat tight. "Your daughter doesn't try to be anyone other than who she is. She shows up at 4 in the morning to make bread. She gives people the benefit of the doubt, even when they don't deserve it. She walks into rooms designed to humiliate her, and she doesn't break." His voice dropped slightly. "I'm not here because I think I can fix her, or save her, or make her better. I'm here because she's already everything she needs to be, and I'd like the privilege of standing beside her while she figures that out for herself. Vivian felt tears prickling behind her eyes and blinked them back aggressively, not wanting to cry at her mother's dinner table. Angela reached over and squeezed her hand once, hard, a gesture that said, "I see you and I understand, and maybe this one is worth keeping." "Well," Angela's voice was suspiciously thick. "That was a good answer. It was a true answer. Even better." She picked up her wine glass. "To truth. And to people who see worth in my daughter when the world keeps trying to convince her she doesn't have any." They drank, and dinner continued with the conversation shifting to safer topics. Jamie's roommate drama, Angela's complaints about her boss at the hospital where she worked as an administrator, Vivian's upcoming interview in the hospitality review. Roman asked questions that suggested he was actually listening instead of just waiting for his turn to talk, and by the time dessert appeared, flan that Angela had made from her own mother's recipe, Vivian felt something in her chest that might have been hope. After dinner, she and Roman helped clean up while Jamie sprawled on the couch, claiming he'd injured himself at the gym and couldn't possibly lift dishes. Angela worked beside them in comfortable silence, washing while Vivian dried and Roman put things away in cabinets he couldn't possibly know the organization of, but somehow figured out anyway. "He's good," Angela said quietly, too low for Roman to hear from across the kitchen. "I know. I mean really good, not just charming, actually kind." "I know, Ma." "So why do you look terrified?" Vivian set down the plate she'd been drying, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Because good things don't happen to me. Because every time I let myself want something, it gets taken away. Because I keep waiting for the moment when he realizes I'm not worth all this effort." Her mother turned off the water and dried her hands, then grabbed Vivian's face between her palms the way she'd done when Vivian was small and needed to hear something important. "Listen to me. You're not too much. You're not too loud or too big or too broken. You are exactly who you're supposed to be. And if that man in my kitchen is smart, which I think he is, he knows exactly how lucky he is that you're giving him a chance." Angela's grip tightened slightly. "But you have to let yourself have this, baby. You have to stop punishing yourself for other people's cruelty. You have to believe that you deserve love without conditions. Can you do that?" "I don't know." "Try, for me, for yourself. Just try." Vivian nodded because she couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, and her mother pulled her into a hug that smelled like the same perfume she'd worn for 20 years, and home and safety. Roman drove her back to her apartment after they'd said their goodbyes, after Jamie had actually hugged him and told him to take care of his sister, after Angela had sent them home with enough leftovers to feed Vivian for a week. They rode in comfortable silence, the city lights sliding past the windows, and Vivian felt wrung out in the best way possible. "Your family is wonderful," Roman said as they pulled up in front of her building. "They liked you." "I liked them?" He killed the engine and turned to face her properly. "Thank you for letting me meet them. I know that was scary for you. Everything about this is scary for me." "I know." He reached across the console and took her hand, threading their fingers together. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." "I haven't brought anyone to meet people who matter to me in 5 years. Not since my sister died and I realized I'd been introducing her to people who made her feel like she had to perform, like she had to be someone other than who she was." His thumb traced patterns on the back of her hand. "I brought you to dinner with your family because I wanted to see you with people who love you without conditions. Because I wanted to understand what real love looks like, so I could try to give you the same thing." "Roman, I'm not done." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know you're scared. I know you keep waiting for me to realize you're not worth it. But I need you to understand something. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not perfect. I'm probably going to mess this up in ways I can't even predict. And I come with my own complicated history that's going to rear its head at the worst possible moments. But I'm here. And I'm staying, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Vivian felt the tears she'd been holding back all evening finally spill over, hot tracks down her face that she couldn't stop. "I don't know how to do this. How to let someone in without waiting for them to leave. Then we'll figure it out together. One day at a time, one dinner at a time. One moment at a time where you let yourself believe that maybe you deserve this." She kissed him then, leaning across the console and pressing her mouth to his with all the desperate hope she'd been trying to suppress. He kissed her back like she was precious, like she was chosen, like she was exactly what he'd been looking for his entire life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Roman rested his forehead against hers. "I should walk you up." "You should." But neither of them moved, too caught in the moment to want to break it. Finally, Vivian pulled back, wiping at her eyes and probably destroying whatever was left of her mascara. "I have to be at work at 4 tomorrow." "Then you should sleep." "I should." He walked her to her door like he had that first night after their real first date, but this time when she turned to say goodnight, he caught her face in his hands and kissed her again, slow and thorough and full of promise. "Good night, Vivian." "Good night, Roman." She watched him walk back down the stairs, listening to his footsteps fade, and then let herself into her apartment with her heart doing acrobatics and her brain trying desperately to catch up with what her body already knew. She was falling. Fast and hard and completely. And for the first time in her life, she didn't want to stop. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of early mornings and stolen afternoons and phone calls that stretched long into the night. The magazine article came out, a full 2-page spread with photos of Vivian at work and quotes about the artistry of bread making that made her sound far more profound than she felt. Marco framed it and hung it in the bakery, and Rosa cried actual tears, and Vivian had to field calls from 3 other publications wanting similar features. Everything was perfect, which was exactly when things started to fall apart. It started with a phone call during her lunch break, a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" "Vivian." Her cousin's voice, sharp with barely controlled fury. "We need to talk." Vivian's stomach dropped. She'd known this confrontation was coming eventually, had been dreading it since Roman had made good on his promise to make sure Melissa faced consequences. But hearing her cousin's voice after weeks of silence still felt like being doused in ice water. "I don't think we have anything to say to each other." "Really? Because I think we have plenty to say. Like how you sicked your criminal boyfriend on me. Like how I lost 3 major clients in 2 weeks because suddenly everyone thinks I'm not trustworthy. Like how my reputation, the one I spent years building, is being destroyed because you couldn't take a joke." "A joke?" Vivian's voice came out flat. "You think humiliating me in front of 40 people was a joke? It was supposed to be funny. You were supposed to realize you didn't belong there and leave. That's it. But no, you had to make a scene, had to get that thug to defend you, had to play the victim so well that now I'm the bad guy." "You are the bad guy, Melissa. You set me up. You invited me to that dinner knowing exactly what would happen. You wanted to watch me suffer." Vivian's hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding her system. "And you know what the worst part is? I would never do that to you. Not in a million years. Even when you've been cruel, even when you've made it clear you think you're better than me, I still showed up for you. I still cared about you, and you repaid that by trying to destroy me for entertainment." "Oh, please, you're not destroyed. You're fine. Better than fine. You got your little magazine article and your rich boyfriend, and everyone thinking you're so brave for surviving something that wasn't even that bad." "It was that bad," Vivian said quietly. "It was the worst thing anyone's ever done to me. And the fact that you can't see that you think what you did was just a joke, tells me everything I need to know about who you really are." There was silence on the other end of the line, heavy and charged. When Melissa spoke again, her voice had changed, gone cold in a way that made Vivian's skin prickle. "You think you've won. You think because Roman Vescari decided to play White Knight that you're untouchable. But you're not. You're still the same nobody you've always been. And when he gets bored, and he will get bored, you'll be right back where you started, alone, invisible, exactly where you belong." The line went dead. Vivian sat there with the phone pressed to her ear, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Every insecurity she'd been trying to suppress came roaring back with a vengeance. The voice that said she didn't deserve Roman, that this whole thing was temporary, that she was fooling herself into thinking someone like him could love someone like her. She called Roman without thinking, needing to hear his voice, needing him to tell her that Melissa was wrong. He answered on the first ring. "What's wrong?" "How did you never called during your break. Something happened." Vivian told him about the call, about Melissa's fury and her accusations and the way her words had landed like physical blows. Roman listened without interrupting, and by the time Vivian finished, she was crying again, furious with herself for giving Melissa that power. "Where are you?" Roman's voice was deadly calm. "At work, in the back office." "Stay there. I'm coming to get you." "Roman, you don't have to." "I'm already on my way." He arrived 20 minutes later, walking into Moretti's like he owned it, and Marco took one look at his face and decided not to ask questions. Roman found Vivian in the back office, still crying, still trying to pull herself together, and he just gathered her into his arms and let her fall apart. "She's wrong," he said into her hair. "About all of it. You're not invisible. You're not nobody, and I'm not going anywhere." "But what if she's right? What if you get bored? What if one day you wake up and realize I'm not enough?" Roman pulled back, holding her face so she had to look at him. His expression was fierce, protective, and something else she couldn't name. "Listen to me. I have spent my entire adult life surrounded by people who have everything: beauty, money, connections, power, and none of it made them interesting. None of it made them real. You know what you have that they don't? Integrity, kindness, the ability to see the best in people even when they don't deserve it, the strength to show up at 4 a.m. and make something beautiful with your hands, the courage to walk into rooms designed to destroy you and not break." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Your cousin is angry because her cruelty had consequences. She's lashing out because she can't accept that she was wrong. But she doesn't get to define your worth. Nobody does. Not her, not the people in that room, not even me. Only you get to decide what you're worth." "I don't know how." "Then I'll remind you until you do. Every single day if that's what it takes." Vivian kissed him then, desperate and grateful and terrified all at once. He kissed her back like she was air and he'd been drowning, and for a moment everything else fell away. "I need to finish my shift," she said when they finally broke apart. "I know, but I'm not leaving. I'll wait." And he did. Roman Vescari, who probably had meetings and deals and important things to do, sat in the front of Moretti's bakery for 3 hours with a coffee and his phone, just so Vivian would know he was there, just so she wouldn't have to be alone with her thoughts. When her shift ended, they walked through Queens together, not talking much, just existing in each other's space. They ended up at a small park near the water, sitting on a bench while the sun set over the city and turned everything gold. "I'm scared," Vivian admitted. "Not just of Melissa, of all of it, of letting myself believe this is real." "It is real. But how do you know? How do you know that this isn't just some temporary thing that's going to burn out?" Roman was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the water. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something that sounded like vulnerability. "I don't know. I can't promise you forever because I don't know what forever looks like. But I can promise you today, and tomorrow, and every day after that where I wake up and choose you." He turned to look at her. "I can promise you that when things get hard, and they will get hard, I'm not going to run. I'm going to stay and fight and figure it out with you. I can promise you that your fear doesn't scare me, that your doubts don't make me doubt, that all the broken pieces you think make you unlovable are exactly what make you human. Roman, I'm falling in love with you, Vivian. Probably already have. And that terrifies me because I've watched love destroy people, because I've seen what happens when you give someone that kind of power over you. But I'm doing it anyway, because you're worth the risk. Because loving you feels like the first real thing I've done in years." Vivian couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the weight of his words settling over her like a blanket, warm and overwhelming and terrifying in the best possible way. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." "Good. Be terrified. But be terrified with me. Be messy and complicated and completely yourself, and let me love all of it." They sat there as the sun finished setting, as the streetlights flickered on, as the city moved around them in its endless dance. And Vivian let herself believe, just for that moment, just for that night, that maybe she deserved this. Maybe she deserved love without conditions. Maybe she deserved a man who saw her completely and chose her anyway. Maybe, for the first time in her life, she deserved to be happy. The confrontation happened on a Thursday, 3 months after that first dinner with Roman, in the produce section of a grocery store in Astoria, where Vivian had gone to pick up ingredients for a test recipe she was working on. She was comparing tomatoes when she heard the voice behind her. "Well, look who it is." Vivian turned and found Melissa standing there with a shopping basket hanging from one arm, looking thin in a way that had nothing to do with health and everything to do with stress. Her cousin had always been pretty in that sharp, polished way that required constant maintenance, but now she looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. Dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, a brittle quality to her smile that suggested it might shatter if tested. "Melissa," Vivian's voice came out flat, carefully neutral. "Surprised to see me in Queens? I know it's not your boyfriend's usual territory, but some of us still have to shop like normal people." The words had teeth in them, designed to draw blood. Though I guess you wouldn't know about that anymore, would you, now that you're playing house with Roman Viscari? "I'm not playing anything." "Right, because a guy like that just randomly decides to date a baker from Queens. That makes total sense." Melissa's laugh was ugly, nothing like the musical sound Vivian remembered from childhood. "You know what's funny? I actually thought I was doing you a favor. I thought putting you in that room would show you what the real world looks like, what real power looks like. Instead, you stumbled into the one man stupid enough to mistake your pathetic routine for something genuine." Vivian felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest, a clarity she'd never had before when dealing with her cousin. "You set me up to be humiliated. You invited me to that dinner knowing exactly what would happen, knowing people would laugh, knowing I'd be hurt. And you did it because it made you feel powerful. Oh, please, don't act like you're some innocent victim. You've been playing the wounded martyr your whole life, making everyone feel sorry for poor Vivian, who works so hard and never catches a break." Melissa's voice rose slightly, drawing looks from other shoppers. "Do you have any idea how exhausting it is? Watching everyone fall over themselves to praise you for doing the bare minimum? You bake bread, Vivian. You're not curing cancer. You're not saving lives. You just get up early and follow recipes." "At least I make things. At least I create something real." Vivian kept her voice level, refusing to match her cousin's escalating anger. "What do you do, Melissa? You manipulate and scheme and tear people down to make yourself feel important. And where did it get you? You lost your clients. You lost your reputation. You lost everything because you couldn't stop being cruel long enough to see that kindness isn't weakness. I lost everything because your criminal boyfriend decided to punish me for hurting his little pet project." Melissa took a step closer, and Vivian could smell wine on her breath even though it was 2 in the afternoon. "You think you're special? You think he actually cares about you? He's using you, Vivian. Men like Roman Viscari don't date women like you. They collect them. They put them on display until they get bored, and then they move on to something newer and shinier." "You're wrong." "Am I? Then why hasn't he introduced you to his family? Why haven't you met any of his real friends? Why does he keep you tucked away in Queens like some dirty secret he's embarrassed about?" The words hit harder than Vivian wanted to admit because they found the soft places she'd been trying to ignore. The fact that 3 months in, she still hadn't met anyone from Roman's actual life beyond the people who worked for him. The way he came to her world but rarely invited her into his. The nagging fear that maybe she was a project to him, a good deed that made him feel noble. But then she thought about the way Roman looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, the way he listened when she talked about the chemistry of sourdough starters, like it was the most important thing in the world. The way he'd shown up at her apartment at 3 a.m. last week when she'd called him crying about a nightmare, had held her without asking questions, had stayed until she fell back asleep. Those weren't the actions of someone collecting trophies. Those were the actions of someone who cared. "You know what the difference is between you and me?" Vivian said quietly. "I don't measure my worth by tearing other people down. I don't need to hurt people to feel powerful. And I don't waste my energy hating people who are happier than I am. I don't hate you, I pity you." But Melissa's voice cracked slightly on the words, betraying the lie. "No, you hate me because I'm happy. Because despite everything you did to humiliate me, I ended up with something real, someone who sees me and doesn't look away. And you can't stand it because all your schemes and manipulation got you nothing but loneliness." Melissa's face twisted, something raw and painful flashing across her features before she could lock it down. For just a moment, Vivian saw past the cruelty to the desperate, frightened woman underneath. Someone who'd spent so long performing strength that she'd forgotten how to actually be strong. "I hope you're right about him," Melissa said, her voice dropping to something that almost sounded sincere. "I hope he's everything you think he is, because when he breaks your heart, and he will break your heart, you won't have anyone to blame but yourself for being stupid enough to believe a fairy tale." She walked away before Vivian could respond, disappearing around the corner with her basket and her bitterness. Vivian stood there among the tomatoes, her hands shaking slightly, trying to process what had just happened. She'd confronted Melissa. She'd stood up for herself without apologizing, without backing down, without accepting scraps of respect. And it had felt both terrifying and necessary, like lancing a wound that had been festering for years. She bought her tomatoes and drove home in a daze, her mind replaying every word. By the time she pulled up in front of her building, she'd made a decision. She needed to talk to Roman, really talk to him, about where this was going, about what they were to each other, about whether Melissa's poison had any truth in it. She called him from her apartment, pacing her small kitchen while the phone rang. "Vivian, everything okay?" He could read her moods now, could hear the tension in her silence. "I ran into Melissa today, at the grocery store." A pause. "What happened?" "We talked, or she talked and I mostly listened, and then I told her she was wrong about you, about us." Vivian stopped pacing, pressing her forehead against the cool refrigerator. "But the thing is, some of what she said got under my skin, not because I think she's right, but because I realized I don't actually know if she's wrong." "What did she say?" "That you're keeping me separate from your real life? That I haven't met your family or your actual friends? That maybe I'm just a project to you, something that makes you feel good about yourself without actually meaning anything." She took a breath. "And before you tell me she's just trying to cause trouble, I know that. I do. But it made me realize that 3 months in, I still don't know what this is, what we are, where we're going." Roman was quiet for long enough that Vivian thought the call might have dropped. Then, "Can I come over? This isn't a conversation I want to have on the phone." "Yeah, come over." He arrived 30 minutes later, still in the suit he'd probably been wearing to whatever meeting she'd pulled him from. He looked tired in a way she'd seen more often lately, the weight of whatever he dealt with on a daily basis showing in the set of his shoulders, the lines around his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said as soon as she opened the door. "For what?" "For making you feel like you're separate from my life. For not introducing you to people. For handling this wrong." He followed her into the apartment, his movements careful like he was navigating unfamiliar territory. "Your cousin is poison, but she's not entirely wrong. I have been keeping you separate. Not because you're a project or because I'm embarrassed, because the world I come from is dangerous and complicated and full of people who would hurt you just to hurt me." "So what, you're protecting me by keeping me at arm's length?" "I'm protecting you by making sure no one can use you against me, by making sure the families who hate me don't see you as leverage, by keeping the ugliest parts of my life away from the best part." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I know how that sounds. I know it looks like I'm ashamed of you or hiding you, but the truth is, I'm trying to keep you safe." Vivian sat down on her couch, suddenly exhausted. "I don't want to be kept safe, Roman. I want to be part of your life. The real parts, the messy parts. I want to meet your family and understand what you actually do and see the world you come from. Because right now it feels like you have this whole separate existence that I'm not allowed into, and I don't know how to build something real with someone who won't let me in. My father is a brutal man who built an empire on fear and violence and doesn't understand why I won't follow his blueprint. My brother is a sociopath who enjoys hurting people and sees kindness as a target. The people I do business with are criminals and corrupt officials and developers who'd burn down an orphanage if it meant better profit margins." Roman's voice was flat, matter of fact. "That's my family, Vivian. That's my world. And I didn't want to bring you into it because once you're in, once they know you matter to me, you become a piece on the board, a vulnerability they can exploit. That's my choice to make, not yours." "I know. You're right. I know you're right." He sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. I lost my sister because I didn't protect her. Because I didn't see the danger until it was too late. And the idea of you being in that kind of danger, of someone hurting you because of me, it makes me want to lock you away somewhere safe where nothing bad can ever touch you. That's not protection, that's a cage. I know. They sat in silence for a moment, the space between them heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Vivian reached over and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. I need you to trust me, she said quietly. I need you to trust that I'm strong enough to handle whatever your world throws at me. I need you to stop making decisions about what I can and can't handle and let me make those choices myself. What if I can't? What if the thought of you getting hurt because of me is more than I can bear? Then we don't have a future, because I can't be with someone who treats me like I'm fragile. I'm not fragile, Roman. I've survived plenty of shit before you came along. I'll survive whatever comes next. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression, a kind of surrender, or maybe recognition. You're terrifying, you know that? Good. You should be at least a little bit afraid of me. He smiled, small and real. My father is having a dinner next week. Family only, which means it'll be awful, intense, and probably involve at least one argument that ends with someone storming out. He's been demanding I bring you for weeks. I've been making excuses. Stop making excuses, I'll go. Vivian, I'll go, she repeated firmly. And afterward, you can stop trying to protect me from your life and start trusting me to navigate it myself. Roman pulled her close, pressing his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway. They stayed like that for a while, wrapped around each other in her small apartment, and Vivian felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that had been missing before. This was real. Messy and complicated and probably heading toward disaster in a dozen different ways, but real. The dinner at Roman's father's house happened the following Thursday. Vivian spent the week trying not to think about it and failing spectacularly, stress baking her way through 3 different bread experiments that all turned out terrible. Marco finally banned her from making anything that required precision until she calmed down. You're going to give yourself an ulcer, Rosa said on Wednesday, watching Vivian destroy a perfectly good batch of brioche by over-kneading. It's just dinner. It's meeting his family, his terrifying criminal family who apparently hate everyone. So what? You're terrifying in your own way. Give them a chance to be scared of you for once. Roman picked her up at 6 on Thursday, and Vivian could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control he was exerting over his expression. He was nervous, she realized, actually nervous about her meeting his family. We can still cancel, he said, as they drove out of Queens toward the kind of neighborhood where houses had names instead of addresses. We're not canceling. My father is going to be an asshole, my brother is going to be worse, and my uncle will probably hit on you at least twice. I've worked in restaurants. I can handle inappropriate men and assholes. This is different. Roman. She waited until he glanced over at her. I love you. I'm not going anywhere. So either you trust me to handle this, or you pull over right now and we have a much bigger conversation about whether this relationship has a future. He went very still, his hands tight on the steering wheel. You love me. Of course I love you. You think I'd put up with all this drama if I didn't? You've never said it before. I'm saying it now. I love you. You're difficult and overprotective, and you have terrible taste in business associates. But I love you anyway. She paused. You going to say it back, or should I start questioning my life choices? Roman pulled the car over to the side of the road, put it in park, and turned to face her fully. I love you. I've loved you since you walked into that room wearing flour on your sleeve and talking about bread like it was the most important thing in the world. I've loved you through every argument and every moment of doubt, and every time you've called me on my bullshit. And I'll love you through whatever disaster this dinner turns into. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Vivian felt something click into place. This was it. This was the moment she stopped being afraid of wanting something too much. This was the moment she decided that loving Roman Viscari was worth whatever complications came with it. They pulled back into traffic and drove the rest of the way in charged silence. The house, and it was definitely a house, not an apartment or a condo, sat behind iron gates in a neighborhood where old money went to calcify. Roman used a code to open the gates, and they drove up a long driveway lined with mature trees that probably cost more than Vivian's entire building. Last chance to run, Roman said as he parked. Stop being dramatic. I've met difficult families before. Not like this one. He wasn't wrong. The moment they walked through the front door, Vivian understood that this wasn't just dinner with family. This was a performance, a test, a carefully orchestrated evaluation of whether she was worthy of the Viscari name. Roman's father, Vincent, was waiting in what appeared to be a formal living room, standing near a fireplace with a drink in his hand and an expression that suggested he'd already decided Vivian was lacking. He was shorter than Roman, built thick and solid, with silver hair and cold eyes that assessed her like livestock. "So this is the baker?" His voice matched his eyes, cold, measuring, unimpressed. "This is Vivian," Roman said, his tone carrying a warning. "Vivian, my father, Vincent Viscari." "Mr. Viscari." Vivian extended her hand, and after a beat too long, Vincent shook it. His grip was designed to intimidate, crushing her fingers harder than necessary. She held his gaze and didn't flinch. "Roman tells me you make bread for a living." "I do." "How provincial." He released her hand and turned back to his drink. "I suppose someone has to feed the working class." "Someone does," Vivian agreed pleasantly. "I find it more satisfying than exploiting them, but different strokes." Roman made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been horror. Vincent's eyes sharpened, reassessing. "You have opinions." "I have a spine. I know some people find that confusing." Before Vincent could respond, a younger man walked into the room, and Vivian knew immediately this was Roman's brother. They had the same dark hair, the same build, but where Roman had learned warmth, this man radiated something colder, meaner. The famous Vivian. He looked her up and down with unconcealed contempt. "I'm Marcus, the brother who didn't fall for a charity case." "Marcus." Roman's voice went deadly quiet. "Watch yourself." "What? I'm just being honest. That's what you wanted, right? For her to see the real family?" Marcus smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Vivian's skin crawl. "We're all wondering the same thing, Roman. We're all trying to figure out what you see in her. She's not pretty enough to be a trophy, not connected enough to be useful, so what is she? A midlife crisis? A rebellion against father? Some kind of extended penance for what happened to Sophia?" Roman moved so fast Vivian barely saw it. One second he was standing beside her, the next he had Marcus by the throat, slamming him back against the wall hard enough to rattle the expensive artwork. "Say her name again," Roman said, his voice conversational but his eyes absolutely murderous. "Say Sophia's name in the same sentence as Vivian one more time, and I will break your jaw." "Boys," Vincent's voice cracked like a whip. "Enough!" Roman held his brother there for another 3 seconds, making his point before releasing him. Marcus straightened his collar, his smile never wavering, though Vivian could see the fear underneath it now. He was scared of Roman. They all were. "Dinner's served," a woman's voice called from the doorway. She was older, elegant in the way of women who'd spent their lives performing grace, and her eyes when they found Vivian were sympathetic. "I'm Lucia, Roman's aunt. Please ignore the men. They're all terrible at introductions." Dinner was exactly the nightmare Roman had promised. They sat at a table that could have seated 25 people spread across too much mahogany, eating food that was technically impressive but tasted like resentment. Vincent peppered Vivian with questions designed to highlight her inadequacy, her education, her background, her family's lack of connections. Marcus alternated between outright hostility and creepy attention, his eyes lingering in places that made Vivian want to stab him with her fork. Roman spent the entire meal on the edge of violence, his jaw so tight Vivian worried he'd crack a tooth. Only Lucia seemed like an actual human being, asking Vivian real questions about her work and seeming genuinely interested in the answers. "Roman tells me you're incredibly talented," Lucia said during a lull in Vincent's interrogation, "that you can make bread rise in impossible conditions." "It's chemistry and patience. Most people don't have the patience for it." "Most people don't have the patience for a lot of things, like building something real, like standing by someone when the world tells them they're not good enough." Lucia looked pointedly at Vincent. "Some of us could learn from that." "Lucia," Vincent's tone carried a warning. "What?" "I'm just making conversation." She turned back to Vivian, and there was steel under her pleasant expression. "My sister, Roman's mother, was a baker too, before she married Vincent. Did he tell you that?" He didn't. She gave it up when they married. Vincent thought it was beneath her, beneath the family. She spent 20 years trying to be someone she wasn't, and it killed her long before the accident did. Lucia's smile never wavered, but her eyes were fierce. Don't make the same mistake. Don't let anyone, not even Roman, convince you to be less than you are. Vivian felt something warm in her chest, a connection to this woman she'd just met. I don't plan to. Good. Then you might actually survive this family. The dinner dragged on for 2 more courses, each more tense than the last. By the time dessert arrived, Vivian had fielded questions about her weight, her age, her fertility, and her financial stability. Vincent had made it clear he thought she was unsuitable in every possible way. Marcus had suggested she was a gold digger at least 3 times. And through it all, Roman had gotten quieter and quieter, the kind of quiet that preceded explosions. It came during coffee. Vincent set down his cup and looked at Vivian with the expression of someone about to deliver a verdict. You seem like a nice enough girl, simple but nice, so I'm going to be direct with you. He folded his hands on the table, patriarch delivering wisdom. My son is going through something right now. Some kind of crisis brought on by his sister's death. He thinks bringing you here, introducing you to the family, proves he's moved on, that he's healed. Vincent's smile was cold. But we both know that's not true. In 6 months, maybe a year, he'll wake up and realize you're not what he needs, that you can't give him what a woman of his station should provide. And when that happens, it will be easier for everyone if you walk away with dignity. Are you offering me money to leave him? Vivian kept her voice level, almost curious. I'm offering you a reality check. You don't belong in this world, Miss Hale. You're a sweet girl who bakes bread and probably makes him feel noble. But noble doesn't build empires. Noble doesn't create legacy. And eventually Roman will remember that. Vivian set down her fork carefully, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. You know what I think, Mr. Viscari? I think you're terrified. I think you spent your whole life teaching your children that love is weakness and kindness is a liability, and then you watched your daughter die because she believed you. And now Roman, your son who survived, your heir, is choosing something different. He's choosing softness. He's choosing me. And that terrifies you because it means maybe you were wrong. Maybe the empire you built on fear and cruelty isn't as strong as the life Roman's building with kindness. The room went absolutely silent. Even Marcus stopped smirking. Vincent's face had gone red, his eyes dangerous. You presume to lecture me about my own family? I presume to stand up for myself and the man I love. You want me to walk away with dignity? Here's some dignity for you. I love your son. He loves me. And nothing you say or do will change that. Not your money, not your disapproval, not your threats or your intimidation or your sad attempts to make me feel small. Vivian stood up, her hands remarkably steady. Thank you for dinner. The food was excellent, even if the company was lacking. She walked out of the dining room with her head high, found the front door, and stepped out into the cool evening air. Her heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe, adrenaline making her hands shake now that the performance was over. Roman caught up with her halfway down the driveway. Vivian? Wait. She turned, half expecting him to be angry, to tell her she'd gone too far. Instead, he was smiling, actually smiling, bright and real and almost disbelieving. That was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. I probably just nuked any chance of your family accepting me. My family was never going to accept you. They don't accept anyone who threatens their worldview. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. But you didn't back down. You didn't apologize. You told my father exactly what he needed to hear, and you did it with more dignity than he's shown in his entire life. He's going to hate me forever. He already hated you. Now at least he respects you. Roman kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. I have never been more in love with you than I am right now. Even though I just told your father his empire is built on fear and cruelty? Especially because you told him that. Someone needed to, and it sure as hell wasn't going to be me or Marcus. They stood there in the driveway of his father's house, holding each other while expensive cars drove past on the street beyond the gates. Vivian felt lighter than she had in weeks. The weight of trying to be acceptable finally lifted. She'd been herself, blunt and honest and unwilling to shrink, and Roman loved her more for it, not less. Can we go home now? She asked. Absolutely. Where do you want to go? Your place or mine? Yours. I want to see where you live when you're not pretending to be normal for my benefit. Roman's apartment turned out to be a penthouse in Tribeca, all floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture, and the kind of kitchen that made Vivian's fingers itch to bake something. It was beautiful and cold and nothing like the warm chaos of her place in Queens. "This is very you," she said, walking through the living room and taking in the expensive art and the lack of personal touches. Controlled and perfect and completely terrifying. "I spend most of my time at your place. This is just where I keep my clothes. We should fix that. Make it feel less like a hotel." "How would you fix it?" Vivian considered, looking around at the blank walls and the pristine surfaces. "Pictures, books, things that matter to you instead of things that impress people. And we should bake something. This kitchen is wasted on someone who probably only uses it to make coffee. You want to bake, right now, after the dinner from hell. I want to make something that feels like home, because this place doesn't feel like home yet, but it could, if you let me help." Roman pulled her into the kitchen, lifted her onto the marble countertop, and kissed her until she forgot about bread and family dinners and everything except the feeling of his hands on her skin, his mouth on hers, the absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. They made bread at midnight, simple sourdough that would need to rise overnight. Roman followed her instructions with the same careful attention he brought to everything, measuring flour and water with precision while Vivian talked him through the process. They got flour everywhere, left the kitchen looking like a disaster zone, and laughed until Vivian's stomach hurt. Later, lying in Roman's too-big bed with the city lights filtering through the windows, Vivian traced patterns on his chest and tried to put words to what she was feeling. "Your family is going to keep trying to break us up," she said quietly. "I know. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. Your father doesn't seem like the kind of man who gives up easily. He's not. So what do we do?" Roman was quiet for a moment, his hand running through her hair with steady, soothing movements. "We keep choosing each other. Every day, every argument, every time they try to make you feel like you don't belong. We keep choosing each other until they realize they can't win. That simple? That's simple. That hard." He tilted her face up to look at him. "You were right tonight. About my father being scared, about the empire being built on fear. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I could be as strong as him, as ruthless as him, but you make me want to prove something different, that there's strength in softness, that building something with love is harder and more important than building something with fear. That's a lot of pressure to put on a baker from Queens. You're not just a baker from Queens, you're the woman who walked into the worst situation possible and refused to break. You're the woman who told my father to his face that he was wrong. You're the woman I want to build a life with." Vivian felt tears prick her eyes. The good kind. The kind that came from feeling seen and chosen and loved exactly as she was. "I want that too, even though your family is terrifying and your world is complicated and I have no idea what I'm doing. None of us know what we're doing. We're all just making it up as we go." They fell asleep tangled together, and Vivian dreamed of bread rising and city lights and a future that felt both impossible and inevitable. She'd confronted her past, met his family, and stood her ground without apologizing. She'd chosen love over safety, vulnerability over protection. And somehow, miraculously, it was working. The bread was perfect when they checked it the next morning, risen and ready to bake. Roman took a picture of it before they put it in the oven, and Vivian laughed at the absurdity of a man who ran half of New York's underground real estate market, photographing sourdough like it was art. "What?" he said, defensive. "It's our first thing we made together. I'm documenting it. You're a sentimental criminal." "I'm your sentimental criminal." The bread baked while they made coffee, filling the apartment with the smell of home and possibility. When it came out golden and perfect, they ate it still warm, sitting on Roman's pristine couch, and getting crumbs everywhere. Vivian's phone rang as she was finishing her second slice. Her mother. "Ma? I just got off the phone with your Aunt Rita, who got off the phone with someone who knows Vincent Vescari's housekeeper." Angela's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "Tell me you didn't actually tell that man his empire was built on fear and cruelty." I might have said something along those lines. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Vivian Marie Hale, Are you trying to get killed? No, I'm trying to have some self-respect. He was offering me money to leave Roman, Ma. What was I supposed to do, say thank you? There was a pause, and then her mother laughed, high and slightly hysterical. You told Vincent Viscari to shove his money. My daughter told one of the most powerful men in New York to shove his money. Technically, I told him his worldview was threatened by the concept of kindness, but close enough. I don't know whether to be proud or terrified. Both, definitely both. They talked for another 10 minutes, Angela cycling through concern and pride in equal measure. By the time Vivian hung up, Roman was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Your mother sounds formidable. She is. You should meet her. Is that an invitation? That's a warning. If you're going to be part of my life, you're going to have to survive my family too. And fair warning, my mother makes your father look subtle. I can handle it. We'll see about that. They spent the rest of the day in Roman's apartment, making it feel less like a showroom and more like a place where actual humans lived. Vivian moved furniture, hung pictures, scattered books around like evidence of life. Roman watched with something close to wonder, like he'd never considered that his space could be warm. By the time the sun set, the apartment looked different, lived in, loved, like a place where two people were building something real. Vivian stood at the window looking out at the city, Roman's arms wrapped around her from behind, and felt the last piece of fear dissolve. She'd been tested. She'd stood her ground. She'd chosen love even when it was terrifying. And somehow, impossibly, she'd won. What are you thinking? Roman asked, his voice low against her ear. That I'm happy. That I didn't think I was allowed to be this happy. That maybe I've spent so long expecting disaster that I forgot what it feels like to just be loved. Get used to it. Because I plan on loving you for a very long time. Vivian turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd chosen her despite every logical reason not to. Promise? Promise. They sealed it with a kiss, standing in the window of his penthouse with the city spread out below them like a promise. And for the first time in her life, Vivian Hale believed she deserved every good thing that was coming her way. Meeting Vivian's family happened 2 weeks later, and Roman looked more nervous than she'd ever seen him. He kept adjusting his collar as they drove to her mother's house in Elmhurst, his hands restless in a way that suggested he was used to controlling situations and had no idea how to control this one. It's just dinner, Vivian said for the third time. It's meeting your mother. That's not just anything. You face down your father. You deal with criminals and corrupt politicians. How is my mother scarier than that? Because your father would just threaten me or try to buy me off. Your mother is going to look at me and decide whether I'm good enough for you. And the terrifying part is she's probably right. They pulled up in front of the small 2-story house where Vivian had grown up, and she could see her mother already standing in the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Angela Hale was 56, built solid from years of working double shifts as a nurse, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She looked at Roman the way a general might assess enemy troops. Ma? Vivian said, climbing out of the car. This is Roman, the man who's been keeping my daughter out until all hours and making her smile like an idiot. Angela's voice gave nothing away. Come inside, dinner's getting cold. Roman shot Vivian a look that clearly said, help me, but she just smiled and followed her mother into the house. He'd wanted to be part of her real life. Now he got to see what that actually meant. Jamie was already in the living room, Vivian's younger brother sprawled on the couch in a way that suggested he'd been waiting specifically to judge Roman in person. He was 24, working his way through a graduate program in social work, and he had their mother's gift for seeing through bullshit. So you're the guy, Jamie said, not bothering to stand. I'm the guy, Roman confirmed. You hurt my sister. I don't care how many people work for you or how much money you have. I will make your life hell. Jamie? Vivian's voice carried a warning. What? I'm just being clear about expectations. But Jamie did stand up then, offering his hand. Roman shook it, and Vivian watched her brother squeeze hard enough to make a point. Roman didn't flinch. Noted, if I hurt her, you have my permission to make my life hell. I don't need your permission. Fair enough. Dinner was pot roast and potatoes and green beans cooked the way Angela had been making them for 30 years. Simple, hearty, nothing fancy. They sat around the small dining table that had hosted every important meal of Vivian's childhood, and she watched Roman try to navigate the particular dynamics of her family. Angela asked him questions the way a prosecutor might, direct and searching. What did he do for a living? How did he make his money? What were his intentions toward her daughter? Roman answered honestly, or as honestly as he could without admitting to actual crimes, and Angela listened with the expression of someone cataloging information for later use. My daughter says you come from a difficult family, Angela said over dessert, apple pie that Vivian had made the night before. That's a diplomatic way of putting it. I'm not interested in diplomacy. I'm interested in understanding what kind of man you are. Whether you're going to drag Vivian into danger because you can't walk away from whatever legacy your father built. Roman set down his fork, giving Angela his full attention. I can't promise Vivian won't be in danger. My world is complicated and sometimes violent, and the people I deal with don't have a lot of boundaries. But I can promise that I will do everything in my power to keep her safe. That I will never ask her to be someone she's not, and that I love her more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. Love isn't enough. You need respect. You need partnership. You need to see her as an equal, not something you protect. I know, she's made that very clear. Roman glanced at Vivian, something soft in his expression. Your daughter doesn't let me get away with anything. She calls me on every bad decision, every overprotective impulse. Every time I try to make choices for her instead of with her. It's exhausting and humbling and exactly what I need. Angela studied him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she turned to Vivian. You love him? I do. And he treats you well, respects you, makes you happy? He does, all of it. Then I suppose that's what matters. Angela looked back at Roman. But understand this. You break her heart, you disrespect her, you make her feel small in any way, and you'll answer to me. And I promise you, I'm scarier than your father ever thought about being. I believe you. Good. Now who wants more pie? The rest of the evening passed more easily, the tension bleeding out as Angela seemed to decide Roman was acceptable, if not perfect. Jamie loosened up enough to actually have a conversation instead of just making threats. And by the time they were doing dishes, Vivian felt the two most important men in her life circling around something that might eventually become friendship. He's not what I expected, Jamie said quietly, handing Vivian a plate to dry. What did you expect? I don't know, someone smoother. Someone who'd charm Mom and then show his real face later. But he's just a guy who's crazy about you and has no idea how to handle meeting your family. That's exactly what he is. You're happy. I can tell. You've got that look you used to get when you were a kid and someone gave you a complicated recipe to try. Jamie bumped her shoulder with his. It's good. Seeing you like this, you deserve it. Thanks, Jamie. Although if he does hurt you, I really will make his life hell. I have connections at the IRS. Vivian laughed, the sound bright and real. I'll keep that in mind. Roman and Angela were in the living room when Vivian and Jamie finished with the dishes, having what looked like an intense conversation. Angela was talking with her hands, the way she did when she was making a point, and Roman was listening with the kind of attention that suggested he understood this was important. Your mother is telling me stories about you as a kid, Roman said when Vivian joined them. Apparently you once made bread at 2 a.m. because you were mad about something and needed to punch dough. I was 13 and fighting with a friend. Baking helped. She destroyed my kitchen, Angela added. Flour everywhere, dishes in the sink, but the bread was perfect. That's when I knew she'd found her thing, the thing that made sense to her when nothing else did. They left an hour later, Roman promising to come back for Sunday dinner the following week. In the car, he was quiet, processing, and Vivian let him have the space to think. Your family is nothing like mine, he said finally. I know. They actually like each other. They show up for each other. They don't keep score or play power games or use love as a weapon. That's what family is supposed to be. I wouldn't know. I grew up thinking family was just another word for people who had leverage over you. He reached over and took her hand. Thank you for sharing them with me, for letting me see what normal looks like. They liked you. Jamie threatened you, which means he's already thinking of you as family, and my mother didn't actually kick you out, which is her version of approval. I was terrified of your mother. Good. You should be. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost sustainable. Vivian worked her early shifts at the bakery, Roman dealt with whatever complicated business filled his days, and they came together in the evenings to build something that looked increasingly like a life. They split time between her apartment and his, learning each other's habits and annoying quirks. Roman left coffee cups everywhere and had no concept of how to load a dishwasher properly. Vivian stole all the blankets and talked in her sleep about sourdough starters. His family continued to be a problem. Vincent called regularly, alternating between threats and attempts at bribery, trying to convince Roman that Vivian was a phase he'd grow out of. Marcus showed up at the bakery once, all smiles and thinly veiled intimidation, until Marco threw him out with a rolling pin and a string of Italian curses. Even Lucia, who'd been kind at dinner, called to suggest gently that perhaps Vivian should consider whether she was really equipped to handle the Viscari world. "They're not going to stop," Vivian said one night, lying in Roman's arms after another call from his father. "They're going to keep pushing until something breaks." "Let them push. We're not breaking. But what if we do? What if this gets too hard, too complicated? What if loving each other isn't enough to overcome everything they're throwing at us?" Roman pulled her closer, his hand running through her hair with the kind of tenderness that still surprised her. "Then we'll break and put ourselves back together. As many times as it takes. Because the alternative, walking away, giving up, letting them win, that's not an option. Not for me." "Not for me either," Vivian admitted, "even though some days I want to. Even though some days it would be easier to just go back to my simple life and pretend none of this happened." "Would you? If you could go back to before that dinner, before you met me, would you choose differently?" She thought about it, really thought about it. The complications and the danger and the way loving Roman had forced her to be braver than she'd ever wanted to be. But she also thought about the way he looked at her like she was the best thing he'd ever found. The way he showed up for her family, learning her mother's routine and checking in with Jamie about school. The way he'd transformed parts of his life, walking away from business deals that crossed lines he used to ignore because she'd made him want to be better. "No," she said. "I wouldn't choose differently, even knowing how hard it would be." "Good, because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." 3 months after the disaster dinner with Vincent, Roman came to the bakery at noon with an expression that made Vivian's stomach drop. He looked exhausted, stressed in a way she hadn't seen since they'd first started dating. "What happened? Can you take a break? We need to talk." Marco took one look at Roman's face and shooed Vivian out from behind the counter. "Go, Rosa and I can handle the lunch rush." They walked to the small park 2 blocks away, sat on a bench that had seen better decades, and Roman took a breath like he was preparing for something painful. "My father is dying. Pancreatic cancer. He has maybe 6 months." Vivian felt the words land, complicated and heavy. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He's a terrible person who's done terrible things. The world will probably be better off without him." Roman's voice was flat, but she could hear the pain underneath. "But he's still my father, and he spent the last month trying to put his affairs in order, which means deciding who inherits what, who takes over which parts of the business." "What does that mean for you?" "It means he wants me to take over everything. The legitimate businesses and the less legitimate ones. The development companies and the construction operations and all the complicated infrastructure that makes New York run the way it does." He looked at her then, and his eyes were full of something that looked like fear. "He wants me to become him, to step into his role and carry on his legacy. And he's made it very clear that he doesn't think I can do that with you in my life." Vivian's chest tightened. "What did you tell him?" "I told him no. I told him I don't want his empire if it means becoming the kind of man who uses fear to control people. I told him I'm building something different, something better." "Roman, but here's the complicated part. If I walk away completely, if I refuse everything, it goes to Marcus. My brother gets control of operations that affect thousands of people, construction workers, building tenants, small businesses that lease space in our properties. And Marcus doesn't have any of the restraint my father developed over the years. He'll run everything into the ground, hurt people for sport, turn the whole thing into something even uglier than it already is." "So you're trapped. Either you take over and become your father, or you walk away and let your brother destroy everything." That's the choice my father thinks he's giving me. But I've been working on a third option. Roman took her hands, holding them carefully. I can take over the legitimate businesses, the development companies, the real estate holdings, all the operations that don't involve violence or corruption. Clean them up, run them properly, use them to actually help the communities they operate in. But it means selling off or shutting down the criminal operations, cutting ties with the families who've worked with my father for decades, making enemies of people who are used to getting what they want. That sounds dangerous. It is dangerous. It's going to piss off powerful people and probably put a target on my back. But it's the only way I can live with myself. The only way I can be someone you can actually build a life with. Vivian felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by what he was offering to do. To risk. You're doing this for me. I'm doing this for us. And for me. Because I don't want to be my father. I don't want to spend the rest of my life hurting people to maintain power I don't even want. I want to build something different, something that matters. And I can't do that without you. What do you need from me? I need you to be patient while I untangle this mess. I need you to understand that the next few months are going to be complicated and probably scary. And I need you to trust that I'm doing this the right way, even when it looks like I'm making things worse. He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket, and Vivian's breath caught. But most of all, I need you to marry me, because I don't want to do any of this without knowing you're beside me, without knowing that no matter how bad it gets, I have you to come home to. The box opened to reveal a ring that was nothing like what Vivian would have expected. Not a massive diamond or some ostentatious display of wealth, just a simple gold band with a small stone that caught the light and held it. It was my mother's, Roman said quietly. The only thing of hers my father didn't sell or give away. I've been carrying it around for 2 weeks trying to find the right moment. But there is no right moment. There's just now, and me asking if you'll take a chance on building something better together. Vivian looked at the ring, at Roman's face, at the future spreading out before them, complicated and uncertain, and probably filled with more challenges than either of them could predict. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, the one who'd walked into that dinner expecting humiliation and found something else entirely. The one who'd learned that love wasn't about being perfect or fitting in or making yourself small enough to be acceptable. It was about finding someone who saw all your rough edges and wanted you anyway. Yes, she said, and watched relief flood Roman's expression. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll stand beside you while you tear down your father's empire and build something better. I'll be patient while you figure out how to be the man you want to be instead of the man you were taught to be. And I'll love you through all of it, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, like it had been waiting for her, and kissed her with enough feeling that an old woman walking past smiled and said something in Russian that sounded like a blessing. I don't deserve you, Roman said against her mouth. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. They sat on that bench for another hour, making plans and promises, talking through the complicated logistics of what came next. Roman would start the process of restructuring his father's businesses, bringing in lawyers and accountants who specialized in cleaning up operations that had been run in the gray areas for too long. He'd reach out to the families and explain what was changing, offer them legitimate partnerships or clean buyouts. Some would accept, others wouldn't. Those were the ones that worried Vivian. What happens when someone says no? When they decide they'd rather get rid of you than lose their access to the criminal operations? Then I deal with it. But I'm not doing this alone. I have people, good people, who've been waiting for someone to stand up to the way things have always been. And I have you, which means I have something worth fighting for. The next few months were exactly as complicated as Roman had warned. His father's health deteriorated rapidly, and with each decline, Vincent became more desperate to secure his legacy. He made increasingly aggressive plays to force Roman into the role he wanted, reaching out to old associates and making promises on Roman's behalf, trying to lock him into agreements that would make walking away impossible. Roman fought back by being more transparent than the Viscari family had ever been. He brought in investigators to audit operations, discovered worse corruption than he'd expected, and started systematically shutting down anything that couldn't be cleaned up. He fired managers who'd been loyal to his father for decades. He canceled contracts with suppliers who'd been using Viscari properties for money laundering. He made it clear that the old way of doing business was over, and anyone who couldn't adapt would be left behind. It made enemies, serious ones. There were threats, both explicit and implied. Someone slashed the tires on Roman's car. Another left a dead rat in the lobby of one of his buildings with a note that said traitor. Vivian started getting hang-up calls at odd hours, and the bakery had a brick thrown through its window at 2 a.m. "This is getting dangerous," Marco said after the brick incident, glass still scattered across the floor. "You need to be careful, Viv." "I know. Roman has someone watching the bakery now, and his apartment, and my apartment. I'm pretty sure I can't go anywhere without someone following me." "Good, because you're family, and I don't want to have to identify you at the morgue." The words were harsh, but Marco's face was worried. Rosa had already threatened to fly to wherever Vincent Viscari was dying and suffocate him with a pillow if anything happened to Vivian. Her family, both blood and chosen, had circled the wagons, protective in a way that made her chest ache with gratitude. Vincent died on a Tuesday in late October, surrounded by family who'd spent decades fearing him more than loving him. Vivian went to the funeral with Roman, standing beside him while he said goodbye to a man who'd taught him everything about power and nothing about love. Marcus was there, cold and angry, making it clear he'd contest everything Roman was trying to do. Lucia came and a handful of cousins Vivian had never met, and dozens of associates who'd profited from Vincent's approach to business. The burial was at a cemetery in Westchester, expensive and exclusive, the kind of place where even the dead were sorted by status. Roman stood at the graveside with Vivian's hand in his expression unreadable, while the priest said words that felt hollow and meaningless. "Are you okay?" Vivian asked quietly as they walked back to the car. "I don't know. I should feel something, right? Relief or grief or closure. But I just feel empty. Like I spent my whole life trying to earn the approval of a man who was never going to give it, and now he's gone, and I'm supposed to figure out who I am without that to push against." "You're whoever you decide to be. That's always been true. You just couldn't see it while he was still here." The weeks after Vincent's death were chaos. His will left everything to Roman and Marcus jointly, which meant they had to come to an agreement about how to split the assets or fight it out in court. Marcus wanted everything to stay exactly as it was: the criminal operations, the corrupt practices, the fear-based management style. Roman wanted to burn it all down and start over. They met in the conference room of a law office in Midtown, lawyers on both sides, and tried to negotiate something that wouldn't end in mutual destruction. "You're destroying his legacy," Marcus said, his voice tight with rage. "Everything he built, everything he worked for, you're just throwing it away because your baker girlfriend doesn't like getting her hands dirty. I'm saving what's worth saving and letting the rest die. That's what he should have done years ago. He built an empire. He made this family powerful, and you're tearing it apart because you're too weak to do what's necessary. I'm strong enough to walk away from power that costs too much. That's something you'll never understand." The negotiations dragged on for weeks, both sides refusing to budge. Finally, Roman made an offer. Marcus could have the criminal operations and the associates who ran them. Everything that required violence or corruption or dealing with the kind of people who made their money hurting others. In exchange, Roman got the legitimate businesses, the development companies, the construction operations, the real estate holdings. A clean split. Marcus took the deal, probably because he thought Roman was an idiot for giving up the most profitable parts of the empire. What Marcus didn't realize was that Roman had spent months moving assets, restructuring agreements, and making sure that every criminal operation Marcus inherited was under investigation by someone: the FBI, the State Attorney General, the IRS. He'd handed his brother a poison pill and let him think it was a victory. "You set him up," Vivian said when Roman explained what he'd done. "I gave him exactly what he wanted. It's not my fault he wanted something that's going to destroy him. That's cold. He would have done worse to me if he'd had the chance. And this way, the people he hurts, they'll have recourse. Law enforcement will be watching. He won't be able to operate in the shadows the way my father did." It was ruthless and strategic, and probably the only way to ensure Marcus couldn't come after them later. Vivian understood the logic, even as it made her uncomfortable. This was Roman's world, the one he'd been born into and was trying to climb out of. The fact that he was doing it at all, that he was willing to risk everything to build something better that mattered more than the methods. By December, the restructuring was mostly complete. Roman had cleaned house, bringing in new management for all the legitimate businesses, establishing oversight committees and transparency measures that made the old guard furious and the employees cautiously hopeful. He'd started a foundation with some of the profits, funding community development projects in neighborhoods his father had exploited for years. He'd become someone his mother would have been proud of, someone his sister would have recognized as the brother she'd lost. And through it all, Vivian was there. Not always understanding the business decisions or the complicated politics, but always present. Always choosing him, even when choosing him was hard. They got married on a Saturday in January, 6 months after that first dinner, in a small ceremony at City Hall followed by a reception at a restaurant in Queens that Marco and Rosa had recommended. Nothing fancy, nothing designed to impress anyone. Just the people who mattered, Vivian's mother and brother, Roman's Aunt Lucia, Marco and Rosa, and the crew from the bakery, a handful of Roman's business associates who'd stuck with him through the transition. Vivian wore a simple cream dress she'd found at a shop in Brooklyn, nothing like the elaborate gown Melissa probably would have chosen. Roman wore a dark suit and a smile that transformed his entire face, made him look younger and happier and more alive than she'd ever seen him. Angela cried through the entire ceremony. Jamie gave a toast that made everyone laugh and then got unexpectedly emotional at the end. Lucia pulled Vivian aside and told her that she reminded her of Roman's mother, that she had the same strength, the same refusal to be diminished. Marco and Rosa gave them a year's worth of bread as a wedding gift, which made more sense to Vivian than any crystal or china could have. "How does it feel?" Roman asked during the reception, pulling Vivian onto the makeshift dance floor while someone's phone played music through a portable speaker. "Being married to you? Terrifying and perfect. That's an accurate summary of our entire relationship. Are you happy?" "Happier than I knew I could be. Happier than I deserve to be." "You deserve it," Vivian said firmly. "You deserve every good thing. You tore your whole life apart to build something better. You walked away from power and money and legacy because it was the right thing to do. Of course you deserve to be happy. I only managed it because of you, because you made me want to be better. I didn't make you anything. You chose it. You did the work." She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong. "I'm proud of you, in case I haven't said that enough." "You say it all the time. I'm just starting to believe it." They danced until the restaurant closed, until the last guest had hugged them and headed home, until it was just the two of them standing on a Queen Street corner in January, married and happy and ready for whatever came next. Roman's phone rang as they were getting into the car. He glanced at it, and something shifted in his expression. "It's Marcus. He's being arrested. The FBI just raided 3 of his properties." "Are you surprised?" "No, I knew it was coming. I helped make sure it was coming." He put the phone away without answering. "But it's still strange, knowing my brother is going down for the same things my father did for 30 years and got away with." "Your father didn't have you making sure law enforcement knew where to look." "True." Roman pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Is it terrible that I'm relieved? That I'm glad he's being stopped before he can hurt anyone else?" "It's human. It's complicated. But it's not terrible." They drove back to the apartment, Roman's place, which was slowly becoming their place as Vivian moved more of her things in. The kitchen now had her sourdough starter living on the counter, books scattered across the coffee table, pictures on the walls that told the story of their life together. It felt like home in a way Roman's perfect showroom never had. "I have something for you," Roman said once they were inside. He disappeared into the bedroom and came back with a manila folder. "Wedding present." Vivian opened it and found legal documents, property deeds, business licenses. It took her a moment to understand what she was looking at. "You bought the building, the one where the bakery is." "I bought the building and transferred ownership to you. The bakery space is yours free and clear. And the apartments above it, I've set them up as affordable housing for people in the neighborhood. No market rate bullshit, no rent hikes every year, just stable housing for people who need it." Vivian felt tears slide down her cheeks, overwhelmed by the gesture. "Roman, you said you wanted to create things that matter, that make people happy. Now you can do that without worrying about rent increases or landlords who don't care. The space is yours to do with whatever you want." This is too much. It's exactly enough. You've given me everything, a reason to be better, a future worth building, a life that actually means something. The least I can do is make sure you have space to keep making the bread that started all of this. She kissed him then, deep and grateful and full of feeling. When they finally pulled apart, she was smiling through her tears. Thank you. For this. For everything. Everything. Thank you for walking into that room 6 months ago and not running when you realized what you'd walked into. Thank you for giving me a chance when you had every reason not to. Thank you for loving me even though I'm complicated and difficult, and come with more baggage than any reasonable person should have to deal with. You're welcome. Although for the record, I'm also complicated and difficult. We're a matched set. They spent their wedding night the way they'd spent so many nights before, wrapped around each other, talking about plans and dreams and the bakery Vivian wanted to expand now that she owned the building. She had ideas about classes for kids in the neighborhood, teaching them the basics of baking, giving them skills and confidence and a place to be proud of. Roman listened and made suggestions and promised to help however he could. What about you? Vivian asked. What do you want now that you've restructured everything and your father's empire is actually becoming something ethical? I want to keep building, turn the development company into something that actually serves communities instead of displacing them. Create affordable housing, renovate neighborhoods without destroying what makes them special. Use all this money and power for something good. He paused, running his fingers through her hair. And I want to have a life with you. Go on trips, have lazy Sundays, maybe eventually have kids if that's something you want. Just be normal. Be happy. Be us. I want that too. All of it. They fell asleep tangled together, married and happy and building something real. And when Vivian woke up the next morning to find Roman already in the kitchen making coffee, badly, because he still couldn't figure out her preferred ratio, she felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that this was right, that they were right, that everything they'd been through had been worth it to end up here. 6 months later, Vivian stood in front of the bathroom mirror in the apartment, staring at the positive pregnancy test in her hands. They hadn't been trying exactly, but they hadn't been preventing it either. And now here it was, concrete evidence that their life was evolving into something new. Roman found her there, frozen and staring. Vivian, what's wrong? She held up the test, unable to find words. His face went through a series of expressions, shock, fear, and then something that looked like pure joy. We're having a baby. We're having a baby, she confirmed. He crossed the bathroom in 2 steps and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious and fragile. How do you feel? Terrified, excited, completely unprepared. That's how I feel about everything important. We'll figure it out together. Your mother never got to meet me. Your sister never got to see you like this, happy and building something good. They would have loved this. I know, but they're part of it anyway. Everything I learned from them, every mistake I'm trying not to repeat, it's all because of them. Roman pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright. We're going to do this differently. We're going to raise this kid with love and kindness and the understanding that strength doesn't mean hardness. We're going to be the family I never had. We're going to mess up sometimes, make mistakes, be human. Of course we are, but we'll do it together. That's what matters. 9 months later, on a warm October evening, Vivian gave birth to a daughter they named Sophia Angela, after Roman's sister and Vivian's mother, the women who'd shaped them both. She was small and loud and perfect, and when Roman held her for the first time, Vivian watched him fall completely apart and put himself back together around this new, fierce love. Angela was there crying and taking pictures and telling everyone who'd listen about her granddaughter. Jamie showed up with flowers and a stuffed animal and a surprisingly good knowledge of newborn care. Marco and Rosa came with enough food to feed the entire hospital. Lucia arrived with a handmade blanket and tears streaming down her face as she held her great niece. She looks like her grandmother, Lucia said, tracing Sophia's tiny features. Your mother, she has her eyes. She does, Roman agreed, his voice thick. Maybe that's her way of being here, being part of this. They brought Sophia home to an apartment that had been baby-proofed within an inch of its life. to a nursery painted soft yellow with a crib that Roman had insisted on assembling himself despite having no idea what he was doing. Vivian's sourdough starter still lived on the kitchen counter, now sharing space with bottles and formula and all the chaos of new parenthood. Life became about 2-hour sleep cycles and diaper changes and learning to function on no rest while keeping a tiny human alive. It was exhausting and overwhelming, and occasionally so frustrating that Vivian cried in the bathroom while Roman walked Sophia in circles around the living room, both of them trying to figure out why she wouldn't stop crying. But it was also moments of perfect clarity. Sophia's first smile directed at her father while he sang to her in Italian. The way she'd settle immediately when Vivian held her close, like she knew she was safe. The afternoon, Angela came over and rocked her granddaughter to sleep while telling stories about Vivian as a baby, drawing lines between generations. "You're doing good," Angela said one Sunday while they all gathered for dinner. Sophia was being passed around like a small, squirmy football, everyone taking turns making faces and cooing. "Both of you, you're building something real here, something worth protecting." "We're trying," Vivian said. "Some days are harder than others. That's parenting, that's life. But you've got each other, you've got family, you've got love. Everything else you figure out as you go." Roman's business continued to evolve. He'd become something of an anomaly in New York real estate, a developer who actually cared about the communities he worked in, who prioritized affordable housing and neighborhood preservation over maximum profit. It made him less money than his father's approach would have, but he slept better at night. And slowly, grudgingly, others in the industry started to notice, started to realize that maybe there was a different way to do things. Marcus ended up going to prison for 15 years after pleading out on racketeering and money laundering charges. Roman went to visit him once, an obligation more than a desire, and came back quiet and thoughtful. "He still doesn't understand why I did it," Roman told Vivian that night. "He thinks I betrayed the family, threw away our legacy for nothing." "What did you tell him?" "That I traded a legacy of fear for a legacy of love, that I chose building something that matters over maintaining something that hurts people, that I hope someday he understands the difference." "Do you think he will?" "No, but I had to try." Vivian understood. Even now, even after everything, Roman was still trying to save the people he loved. It was one of the things that made her love him more, this stubborn refusal to give up on people even when they'd given up on themselves. The bakery expanded exactly as Vivian had dreamed. She brought in 2 more bakers, trained them in her methods, started the classes for neighborhood kids she'd wanted. Every Saturday morning, a dozen children showed up to learn how to make bread, flour everywhere, chaos and laughter, and the smell of yeast rising. Marco and Rosa semi-retired, still coming in to supervise and tell stories, but trusting Vivian to run things her way. The New York Hospitality Review article came out a year after that first interview, a full feature on artisan bakeries that positioned Moretti's as one of the city's hidden gems. Vivian's phone rang for 2 days straight with people wanting to place orders, food bloggers wanting to visit, other bakeries wanting to learn her techniques. "You're famous," Roman teased, reading the article over breakfast while Sophia gummed a piece of bread crust. "I'm not famous. I'm just getting recognition for work I've been doing for 10 years. Take the compliment. You've earned it." She had earned it. Through early mornings and burned batches and years of loving something that most people never noticed. Through staying true to what mattered even when it would have been easier to chase trends or take shortcuts. Through building something real with her hands and her heart and her stubborn refusal to give up. On a Saturday morning in May, 2 years after their wedding, Vivian stood in the bakery at 4 a.m. shaping dough while Sophia slept in a portable crib in the office. The morning light was just starting to filter through the windows, painting everything gold. She could hear Roman in the kitchen, loading the ovens with the first batch of sourdough, humming something under his breath. This was her life. Not perfect, not easy, not anything like what she'd imagined when she'd walked into that dinner 2.5 years ago. But it was real, and it was hers, and it was built on love and work, and the stubborn belief that good things were worth fighting for. Roman came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to her neck. "Good morning." "Morning. You're up early." "Wanted to help, plus I can't sleep without you anymore. The bed feels too big." "You're getting soft." "I am absolutely getting soft. It's your fault." Vivian turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd chosen her when the world said he shouldn't, who'd torn his life apart to build something better, who loved her with a fierce, stubborn devotion that made her brave enough to believe she deserved it. "I love you," she said. "I love you too, even though you wake up at ungodly hours to make bread." "Especially because I wake up at ungodly hours to make bread." "Especially because of that," he agreed. They stood there in the early morning light, flower on their hands and love in their hearts, and Vivian thought about the woman she'd been, the one who'd expected humiliation and found something else, the one who'd learned that taking up space wasn't a crime, that demanding respect wasn't selfish, that loving someone meant letting them see all your rough edges and trusting they wouldn't run. She'd survived cruelty without losing kindness. She'd walked into a trap and come out with dignity. She'd chosen love when it was terrifying, had built a life when it would have been easier to hide. And standing there with Roman's arms around her and their daughter sleeping in the next room and bread rising in the warmth, Vivian Hale Viscari finally understood what her mother had been trying to tell her all along. She had always been enough. She had always been worthy. She had always deserved to take up space in the world and be loved exactly as she was. The bread timer went off, signaling it was time to bake. Vivian kissed Roman once more and went to work, her hands steady, her heart full, building the life she'd earned with flour and hope, and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be.